how we might ordinarily approach a proposition in this assembly. And the Council of Ministers have said a few times that from their position, it's not to be either recommended or opposed. It's a matter of conscience for members. And just for the record, that is the approach that Reform Jersey's taken on this as well. And I think there is no other way that you can deal with this subject because of the seriousness of what it's about. It's literally a life or death matter, and that's not normally what's before us in this assembly. And so we have to consider it extremely carefully and deeply, and consider what the effect of the decision we'll make today will have on people in the future, and how that can sit on our consciences one way or another. During the last election, I was asked my position on assisted dying, and I did say that I was in favour of the principle of it, and I made a point of saying that this was so long as assisted dying was always thought of alongside assisted living, alongside palliative care, and of course all the safeguards to ensure that nobody's ever pressured into opting for one choice rather than another. But in the run up to this debate and the prospect of actually having to cast a vote and ensuring that I vote in a way that is in line with my correspondence, I decided to deliberately force myself back onto the fence on this, and to deliberately manufacture doubt in my mind so that I could genuinely consider alternative positions on this and genuinely consider the arguments against it, so that I could not be held back by any sort of predetermined bias on it, and genuinely consider all of those, because I think that the arguments against are absolutely genuine and well-meaning and worth considering, which is why I've made the effort to read every single word we've been sent in correspondence on this. I've not been able to attend some of the public meetings because of COVID isolation, but I've tried to watch what I can on YouTube, and watch the ITV debate on this yesterday. And having considered everything that's been said by those who are so passionately against this, I still cannot move myself away from the core principle that I think this is about. And it is ultimately about self-determination, autonomy and choice, for people to make what will be a very personal choice about how they choose to leave this world and end their lives. And I simply cannot go down a route that would enforce my view or anybody else's view on those people, because I fundamentally believe that it has to be a matter for them. And having paid as much attention as I could to the arguments against, and for all of the very well-meaning correspondence that we've had on this, I have come to the view that some of the arguments that have been made against this are in fact fallacious arguments, and I regret to say that some of those have started creeping into this debate recently. And I think that many of the cases that have been presented to us, the hypothetical scenarios, just aren't valid when you look at the wording of what we actually have before us in this proposition. We're being asked to allow for assisted dying in actually quite specific circumstances. This doesn't include children. This doesn't include people who are not terminally ill, but who have a chronic illness or a disability. It is only for those who are going to die within 6 months anyway. And it's not about people making the choice on behalf of others who no longer have capacity. It is about free and autonomous human beings who are going to die soon anyway, deciding for themselves to end their journey through life a few weeks earlier because they have decided that that is what's right for them, and that that would be the most dignified way for them to die. And I think ultimately the argument against that at this level of this debate is about some people saying to others that we know better. We know what is best for you rather than you know what is best for you. And that doesn't sit well with me at all. And I think it's been inadvertently highlighted by those who have opposed this by talking about the value of human life. And of course, you're not going to find anybody who disagrees that human life is valuable. But there will be people who, for whatever reason, reach a stage towards the end of their life where they, perhaps based on how they emotionally feel, or perhaps based on how they've logically considered these things, who have come to the view that there isn't any value in their life anymore because the suffering that they're having to endure outweighs all the benefits that they have elsewhere in life, whether that's in the love of their friends and family, or whether that's in anything else they take joy in, where the value that they take from life is no longer there. And the longer it goes on for, the less value there is, the worse off they become, and are denied what, in their experience, could be as close as you can possibly get to such a thing as a good death. And that has got to be something for individuals to reconcile with, not for other people to tell them that they can't have that, and to say to them that even though you're suffering, even though you're you would prefer another route out of life, you have to endure that suffering, you have to continue living through it, because our law won't allow you what many people would consider to be a more humane way out of life instead. And I simply don't accept that we as representatives of the public have the right to tell people what's best for them there. There have been a few other arguments against that I think have been flawed. The main argument, and I think the most important argument against, has been about safeguards. And that is something that everybody is genuinely concerned about. I said when I stood for election that I would be concerned about safeguards, and I've said to those who I've spoken to in recent days and weeks that there are circumstances in which I can oppose this if those safeguards are not good enough. But we're not at the right time for that. We are at a time now where we're being asked to decide on the principle of assisted dying. And in some people's minds, I don't believe that there will ever be safeguards that are good enough to persuade them to support assisted dying, because they're simply against it on principle. But if we're prepared to entertain the idea of the principle, if we're then going to consider the safeguards beyond what is specified in the wording of this proposition already, there is still a lot of time to do that. And when this would eventually come back to the Assembly for further deliberations, that would be the moment at which to decide whether we think the safeguards presented in the legislation are actually fit for purpose or not. And if they can be demonstrated not to be fit for purpose, then even some of those who are in support of the principle of assisted dying would vote against to protect other people. But we're not at that stage yet. We are only being asked to determine on the principle of whether it is worth us beginning this journey and putting that legislation together, consulting with the professionals, bringing in those who have very real and legitimate concerns on this, to try and come up with a framework that is as good as possible. So I don't think now is the time to reject this proposition on the basis of concerns about the safeguards. That will come later. And that can be examined at that point and thrown out at that point if it's not good enough. Another argument's been made about the slippery slope. And that is, I think, also a very bad argument. There is no such thing as a slippery slope when it comes to a democratically elected parliament debating on legislation, because if at some point in the future somebody has an idea that they want to widen the scope or they want to take things down a different road, we have the ability to put the brakes on it immediately and vote against. And ultimately, the safeguard there is our democratic process guided by what the public ultimately wants. And I think that when there have been comparisons made to other countries, saying other countries eventually widened the scope and look what's happened there. Well, I've looked into some of those countries and I have not actually, I think, found mass regret in those countries for that. They simply evolved over time, considered these issues more, and been through their own democratic processes on this. And I think those who were uncomfortable with the scope being widened are largely those who were uncomfortable with the principle from the outset. And of course, they're entitled to that position, but we have our democratic processes for deciding what is right for our community, and that's not a slippery slope. But I think the last argument that's been made against that's particularly flawed has been a focus on the process and the composition of the citizens' jury. Some in the media have made a specific point about this, and I have to say that certainly for my conscience on whether I believe it's right or not for Jersey to allow for assisted dying, the citizens' jury is completely irrelevant to me. I think what they've produced is extremely interesting, but their conclusion is ultimately a minor issue compared to what I think our consciences should say. That's ultimately what ought to determine what our vote is. And if you don't like what the citizens' jury said, I think to criticise the process is not a particularly good argument. And so ultimately, when you consider those arguments against, I think the ultimate principle behind those arguments is some people wanting to deny other people choice and saying that they know better. And I simply can't accept that. I mentioned the ITV debate on this. They produced a half-hour debate with two people on each side of the argument, which I watched entirely. And in this debate, it included a man who has a degenerative illness and who, not now, but at some point in the future, believes he may well be in a position where assisted dying would be an option he would want to seriously consider. And I listened to his argument and I listened to his perspective, and every time he spoke, I couldn't help but think, who are any of us to tell him that he's wrong, that he is incapable of making his mind up, and that his argument is illogical? I don't think we have that right. And when it was put to him that there would be other options that didn't involve assisted dying, he said no thank you to those, because they would involve suffering that he would not want to experience. So this denying of choice to those people, I think, is fundamentally wrong. And just to think of my own circumstances here, I have no idea how I will feel when I face death. I don't know if I'll be somebody who will be grateful for a long and happy life or be resentful that it was ending. But I don't know if I'll be brave. I don't know if I'll be scared. And I'm somebody who doesn't believe in God and believes that at the point of death there is eternal nothingness, just as there was for the billions of years of this universe's existence before I was born, and I can't comprehend that. But what I am sure I won't appreciate would be being forced to suffer and to feel pain if I didn't want to. And if I wouldn't want that forced on me, it's wrong for me to seek to force it on other people. So I will be supporting this proposition. At times in thinking how I would approach this, I think I may have felt an ambivalence on what the result ultimately was, but I have actually now come to the view that I care deeply about this and seriously hope it is accepted because of the impact it will have on those who will benefit from it. And so I end with a variation of the same quote that I know others will have used versions of, to the point where it may be seen as a cliche, but I certainly think you can't put it any better than this. But adopting this proposition will not lead to more death, but it will lead to less suffering. And I don't want to cast a vote that will leave my conscience feeling like I put people through suffering when there was an alternative that they may have preferred instead. And so I'll be supporting the proposition, and I urge other members to do so. But I see that a member has asked for a point of clarification, sir.
Very much. Senator Conatable St Peter.
Sir, the Deputy of St Wands wanted a point of clarification, and I'm happy to take it.
I'm sorry, I beg your pardon, Deputy of St Wands. Yes, I didn't see that. Point of clarification.
Thank you, sir. I understood the senator to say that the only people eligible for assisted dying in this proposition are those who are reasonably expected to die within 6 months. Can the senator confirm that he has looked at and considered Part A, Roman 1.3 of the proposition, which also refers to people who have an incurable physical condition resulting in unbearable suffering that cannot be alleviated, but without that time period of expectation to die? Thank you, sir.
Would you wish to clarify your speech, Senator Messick?
It's a fair point. The Deputy is right. That is in the proposition, and that would be an option.
Very well. Thank you very much, Senator Constable St Peter. Constable St Peter? We can't hear you, Constable, if you're speaking. Could you indicate in the chat, please, if you are attempting to speak? I'll move on to the next scheduled speaker in that case, and we'll revert to the Constable of St Peter in case there's some technical difficulty. Deputy Doublé.
Thank you, sir. I am a humanist, sir, and people often ask what this means to me, and it means that I have a deep concern for my fellow human beings. It means that I strive to live a full and meaningful life, and I determine my own values based on reason and empathy. It also means that I have committed to helping others do the same. My humanist beliefs include that each individual human being has an absolute right to live by their own personal values, and the freedom to make decisions about their own life, so long as this does not result in harm to others. Humanists feel a responsibility to their fellow humans and act not just in their own best interests, but in the interests of wider society. Humanists UK and the Channel Islands Humanists have been campaigning on this issue for that very reason, and I thank them for the work that they do representing non-religious islanders. The Deputy of St Wands, I wanted to reflect on his speech, which I thought was really excellent. And he touched on the concept of responsibility towards others. And I can see that he's given this a lot of consideration and accordingly has given a lot of thought to which arguments he chose to lay before us today. And it was a very well argued speech. The point that most struck me is when he urged us not to think on an individual level, but on a collective level, and to bear in mind the harm that could possibly be caused to a group of people if we do agree this in principle proposition today and eventually implement a law. And this argument is very persuasive, of course, because I think every last one of us in this assembly has compassion for those that the Deputy was talking about, those who are frail and marginalised. And what we have to do today is weigh up two things. and the previous speaker touched on this as well. On one side, we have a theoretical situation whereby we are theorising that if we introduce assisted dying, that possibly one of our frail or elderly or vulnerable population could be taken advantage of as a result of that law. And I mean, the very thought of that is absolutely horrifying. And we would never, any of us, ever want to cause harm or allow indirectly any harm to come about to a vulnerable person because of a law that we have implemented. And that's what we have to weigh up on the one side as the worst case scenario. However, sir, on the other side of the scale, what we're considering today are the levels of extreme suffering that previous speakers have outlined. And that suffering is being experienced by islanders in the here and now. It is not theoretical. There are people who right now, and possibly people who might be listening to this, people living with constant pain in their body, and I cannot imagine what that does to the mind. And there are people who have suffered a loss of dignity. And another speech that struck me was that given by the Constable of St. Martin, when she spoke about the impact of watching a loved one go through this. And it must be unimaginably hard to want to help your loved one, to alleviate their suffering, and to be unable to help them because of a law that prohibits you showing them this compassion. I have weighed this up, sir, and I believe that we need to remedy this. The theoretical future suffering that some are speculating may be inflicted versus the suffering being experienced by some of our fellow human beings here and now on our island. And I find that I am grateful to the Deputy of St. Juan's for raising this, because after listening to it, I remain resolute that we must approve this in principle proposition today and start work which could ease that suffering which is already happening. But I find that I'm now equally resolute that when such a law is in place, that law and the accompanying policies within various departments must take absolute care for the frail and vulnerable. And we must actually go beyond this, sir. If, and indeed it seems there are worries about members of our community not being given the care they deserve, then we must change not just our legislation and policies, but we must also change our culture. I will not stand by and let Jersey become a place where the elderly are worried that they will not be cared for. We, the state, should be facilitating access to the best care and the best support so that families do not ever have to worry about anyone being a burden to anyone. Perhaps if we as a society did not operate on the assumption that it's the duty of women to act as unpaid caregivers, then this issue of anyone being a burden would not arise. And I would like to know from those who are arguing against assisted dying based upon this argument about becoming a burden, what are they doing to address this issue at the root? Because I believe that we must value those in our society who provide care, and we must also value the cared for. We must recognise that the elderly and vulnerable have an inherent value as human beings and ensure that they have a place in our society. And we can do that, and we can look after the rights of those who are suffering unbearably. We can do both. So I will be voting for this proposition today, sir, keeping in mind as I do the impassioned pleas from the late Alan Dushman and his partner who appealed for us to approve this. And I very much appreciate that we will have an opportunity, or the States Assembly will have an opportunity to ensure that the appropriate safeguards are put in place when the law comes forward, following hopefully the approval of this in principle proposition today, and that no harm is caused by any new law in this area. And I really hope that the level of concern for the elderly and vulnerable, which many of us are expressing today, results in some actual cultural change going forwards.
very much, Deputy. Conor for St Peter, are you in a position to speak to us now? Conor for St Peter? Apparently not. Dean.
Thank you very much, sir, and I'm very pleased to follow the previous speaker. We all know that this debate represents the single most important ethical issue that we'll face in a generation. And I have found this debate to be really respectful, and I'm very grateful to people for that, who are listening to each other's points of view. And people have been very vulnerable in expressing some personal stories. And of course, our starting point must be compassion, which is a mark of a civilized society. But of course, it must also be a compassion that embraces the full spectrum of this discourse, both those who we just mentioned, who are elder abuse and people who are frightened that they will be in the way, devalued or defenseless, and those who are fearful that they face a future of unbearable suffering. So compassion has to embrace those who shout loudly and those who have no voice. I'm also very grateful to the Constable of St Wan's for his comment on the religious dimension here. And it's really important to underline that that is not the fault line for this debate. So I'm very grateful to the Constable of St Wan for noting this. There is no fixed Christian position. There are many Christians who are against assisted dying and many for, and that applies to people of other faiths and none. I would like to comment, first of all, if I may, on the citizens' jury. And whilst I agree with Senator Mezek that the citizens' jury is not the be-all and end-all, I think it did set the scene, and I think it requires some comment. In the briefing leading up to this proposition, we were told, and I quote, the citizens' jury was carefully selected and was completely representative of the population. We were also told on the government website that the jury was selected at random and demographically represented the island's population. And as a result of the initial report, we were told that 18 out of 23 said yes to the question, should assisted dying be permitted in Jersey? Later reports, however, the one that came out a few months later, stated that prior to any meeting of the jury, the selected panel was already 52.2% in favour of assisted dying, and a further 30.4% were probably in favour, giving a total of 82.6%. 19 out of the 23 were already in favour of assisted dying before the jury actually met. I simply hold that up to members for them to decide if that is completely representative of the population of the island, but my inbox from my email account would suggest otherwise. Now, I do recognise, of course, that the makeup of the jury needed to reflect something of the views of the wider population with regard to physician-assisted suicide, but our jury percentage was based not on a specially commissioned survey in Jersey, but on a British social attitude survey from 2017, in which 3,000 people out of the 66 million people in the British Isles were asked about assisted dying. And from that, it was extrapolated that 82.6% of our jury should be made up of people who were in favour or probably in favour. And I think members need to reflect whether that was a healthy starting point for this debate, which did in fact set things in motion, and whether the jury's conclusions, and I quote from the very beginning on the first page of the proposition, having regard to the key recommendations of the citizens' jury. I'm not sure that can bear the weight of this proposition. And it's interesting to note, sir, that in the final jury report, the number went down from 19 out of 23 to 18 out of 23, such as it is. We've heard a great deal in this debate, and it's been really helpful, actually, hearing about human rights and autonomy and personal choice. And of course, these are valid concerns. And if it was just about that, sir, most of us would be wondering what the fuss was all about. But I think this needs some further reflection. And I know we've had speakers mention this already, but the reality is that we are in community. We are not just concerned about autonomy. Our freedom of choice does have an impact on others. And it's important that members understand that we're not just discussing personal ethics in this debate. We may sway towards that as our preference, but we are also discussing societal ethics, our collective decision that will impact everyone on the spectrum. And if we legislate for something, it crosses the line from personal to societal, and that has consequences for all of us. And in many ways, to my mind, the question isn't so much, is assisted suicide right or wrong? People will come down on either side of that fence for many different reasons. The crucial question to my mind is, should there be legislation? And what impact will that have? Will it do more good than harm, or more harm than good? Will it protect not just the robust, the articulate, those who have resources, but those who are susceptible, vulnerable, or voiceless? That is the societal side of the ethics of this question. And if we get this wrong, either now or later, there is no putting the genie back into the bottle. The consequences are far-reaching because any legislation that results from this proposition will be transmitting a message about value one way or the other. We have to get it right. And it could conceivably be the right thing to do in any individual case to help someone who has a terminal illness in unbearable suffering with no hope of alleviation. But there is a world of difference between that and creating a licensing system, for want of a better phrase, for such acts for specific categories of people through legislation. The moment that is done, it moves from being an individual to a societal issue. And whilst I agree with Deputy Doublé, I do not think that it is theoretical in nature to be concerned about those who are vulnerable. In other jurisdictions where this has come into place, that's not theoretical, that is actual. So we have to be on guard. Now, of course, the best arguments for legalizing assisted suicide are personal in nature. And we've seen much of that in the media, and people have shared that very vulnerably today, and I'm really grateful to them for that. I've been a priest for 32 years. I've sat by the bedside of hundreds of people as they've suffered, and dozens of people if they have literally died in front of me, from every walk of life, and for that matter, every decade of life. And I could recite many personal encounters where a family has had an opportunity to show care, express their love, reconcile the irreconcilable, because they did not end their lives early. My point, sir, is that if we allow the personal or the emotional to be the ultimate steering in this matter, I fear we miss the bigger questions that rush in the moment we step back from those stories, however valid they may be. So what are some of those bigger questions? Well, the Minister of Health and Social Services has already touched on one of those. It's a question of suicide. And it's really important that we look at this subject either now or if it goes ahead into the future, that proper research is done surrounding the issues of increased numbers of suicide. Some have suggested that physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia will have a dampening effect upon suicide, because those who would otherwise commit suicide would instead seek assisted dying as an alternative. But the statistics do not bear that out in jurisdictions where this is already taking place. There is an increasing evidence of a link between legally assisted suicide and increasing suicide rates in the general population. I can provide that statistical information if members would like a copy. If we are looking at legislation that will do more good than harm through the lens of societal ethics, we need to tackle that thorny issue. It needs to be addressed as we move forward. Legalizing suicide sends a message to our island community, however unintended, that taking your own life is an action that you should consider. Now, again, if we are robust and know what we want, we may not even hear that subliminal message, but those who are vulnerable and frightened and at risk might. And if you have spent any time with terminally ill people or sat with people as they have died, as I have, and probably more so than anybody else in this assembly, then you will know that many people are anxious. They are coming to terms with their mortality. They are concerned about their families. Their mental well-being is fragile. The question we must ask is, do they need reassurance or a loophole to allow them to be removed from being a burden to others? I mean, it's not as simple as that, but that is one of the choices. And actually, it does cut across the grain of every other strategy that we have for suicide prevention. That also needs addressing. The other question I'd like to draw attention is the point that no one has the right to tell another person how or when they may choose to die. Now, if this was just about personal ethics, I would completely agree with that, sir. But the proposition seeks to involve the ministration of others, albeit with a conscience clause. It will involve a change in the culture of doctor-patient relationships and a change in the culture of doctors' role in preserving life. That needs seriously looking at, sir. And actually, that is one of my greatest concerns, the issue of trust between the medical practitioner and the patient. The other question that I have, sir, surrounds the word dignity. It's been used a great deal in this debate so far. And it is often argued that it is undignified to die in circumstances where people need the extensive care of others or because they are suffering. But that needs some very careful unpacking, sir. Because firstly, it has the potential to undermine the excellent palliative care available in this island, which seeks at every turn to bring dignity to people who have a terminal illness and encourage them to live until they die. And secondly, sir, this is often where I have seen humanity at its best, both in the caring and in the being cared for. Now, I'm not suggesting some kind of romantic nonsense here, but rather that dignity, respect and compassion come in many guises and is not the sole possession of those who support assisted dying. And I know that some of you will be saying that, of course, is why we have safeguards in place. And I'd like to move on to those, because the critical thing is that any safeguard is completely worthless unless it can be consistently translated into practice. Safeguards, in my view, need not only to be integral to a proposition on assisted dying, they are the very essence of such a proposition. How are members to proceed when they do not know how the safeguards would work in practice and satisfy themselves that they would be effective to protect vulnerable people? I think there is a danger here, sir, of writing a blank ethical check. And so whatever happens, it's critical that those safeguards are protected and ring-faced. What we have at present, sir, are statements of intent with language that lacks both clarity and definition. I don't really have time to go into all the concerns that I have about that, but forecasting life expectancy is not an exact science in the medical world. There is a risk, however small, that people could be pushed towards assisted dying far earlier due to improper diagnosis. There is the risk of trust being eroded between doctor and patient. Who will decide that someone has unbearable suffering? And how will we judge that that is a physical condition and not one brought on by poor mental health treatment or inadequately funded care? Or dare I say it, the coercion of others for their own gain? Someone once said to me so in this debate, where there's a will, there's a family. And what of those whose role it will to be to administer lethal drugs? What about their well-being and the impact upon them? Studies have already shown in other jurisdictions that there are long-term effects upon medical practitioners who do this. Vulnerability has a wide definition, sir. Now, please hear me. I'm not trying to ridicule these so-called safeguards or to be insensitive to those who find themselves at that point in their lives. I've spent too much time with people at that point to do so. But I simply want to ask the question, why not 12 months? Why not unbearable mental pain? Why not save money and offer the patient PAS instead of expensive life-prolonging drugs? Why only give it to adults? My point is that safeguards are arbitrary and therefore they contain the seeds of their own expansion. Where do we draw the line? That will be critical. And this does have the potential for mission creep to be built into it. As Claire Fox in her speech in the House of Lords said, looking across Western societies in the last 50 years, it's hard to think of a single issue where, for better or worse, progressive campaigners accepted an initial piece of liberalisation and went no further. Indeed, the logic of progressivism demands further continual progress. So in conclusion, the questions we are faced with are, is this just about my autonomy, my human rights, my personal choice? Or is there a wider societal question that we need to ask? Is wider legislation the answer to the very small group of people who, despite the extraordinary advances that have been made in pain control and palliative care, feel that for whatever reasons they should end their lives prematurely? Or is there another way? When we talk about compassion, we have to ask ourselves, compassion for whom? A law such as has been proposed has the potential to become a law to oblige the strong, not a law to protect the weak. Members need to be very clear about the impact of this proposition upon the island you represent, upon the community in which you all live, and the democracy that you characterize. As Senator Mezek said, what you decide in this assembly will literally be a matter of life and death for the people of this island. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Celine. I'll give another attempt to the Connétable St. Peter if he's able to speak to us. Connétable St. Peter. If the Connétable is able to hear me, Connétable, I'm not going to call upon you again. If you wish to speak, will you please indicate a desire to speak? Very well. Deputy Ash.
Thank you very much, sir. And I'm delighted to follow the last speaker. This does, on first appearance, seem very easy, doesn't it? Someone has a very short time to live, they're in enormous pain, and they wish to die. It is, as many previous speakers have said, your own life. And as they have correctly said, you should have a right to decide how you end it. So why are we seeing so many emails and controversy around this subject, which is so emotive? Accepting that some are purely against this on ethical and religious grounds, which I can accept, what are the other problems that we can see that arise from this? Firstly, we have laws to protect the vulnerable. They're there because people do bad things, sir. They're not there because everyone is a saint. The law on people assisting dying, or to put it bluntly, helping people kill themselves, is no different. And let's be perfectly clear, that is what this is. It's not a medical solution we're looking at here, or the health minister would be bringing this proposition. It is a change in the law to allow someone to kill themselves. And perhaps more importantly, when we look at safeguards, to allow others to assist them to do so. There are, of course, some that will say that there will be strict rules that govern this process, sir. And I'm sure there will. And they will tell you that there is no chance of any wrongdoing. That is not necessarily true, though, is it? We're saying there is no chance of wrongdoing because of the people who are going to oversee this. Would we be saying that if politicians were to decide? Or estate agents? Or bankers? Certainly not, sir, because they are certainly not people to be trusted by the vast majority of the population. Doctors, however, most certainly are. But I'm afraid, sir, doctors are not always perfect. Indeed, Britain's biggest ever serial killer was a GP. But even allowing for that, hopefully never being repeated, sir, there are, of course, possibilities that pressures will build on medical staff to free up hospital space and resource. Unpalatable though that fact and thought may be, it is always a possibility. It may be, sir, that families will put pressure on elderly relatives when they're at their most vulnerable times of their lives. Sadly, it does happen. Much as I, and I'm sure many others, would like to pretend it doesn't, it does, especially where money is concerned. And it may, of course, also be where the person involved sees themselves as a burden to their family. Again, especially if realizing that care is going to cost their family financially. Is that what, as a society, sir, we should be saying is acceptable and to be encouraged? Of course, sir, when we look at money, we should also look at whether this is going to be privately funded or government funded. If it's a private facility, it's a business. And that is the stark fact, it is a business. This immediately raises concerns. Do you think such a business would be actively discouraging people from using their end of life option? They may, but of course there is also the possibility that they would not. If it, of course, is government money, sir, it would hopefully provide better safeguards. But would we not be better putting our money into the hospice that I'm afraid government sadly lacks in doing at the moment and leaves them very much to their own devices, which incidentally they fill using tremendous resourcefulness? But would we not be better putting government money into hospice and boosting our palliative care offering? Moving on, sir, one of the major problems, though, even if you get these things right, even if we have all these things right, and that there is no wrongdoing or possibility of wrongdoing from anybody, one of the major problems is of slippage. That is to say, sir, that you move away from the concept that I already put out there, that someone has a very short time to live, are in enormous pain, and they decide that they wish to die. What of people who have severe depression? Why should they not be allowed to end the huge suffering and misery that surrounds them? It's a good question, isn't it? If they have had years of psychiatric help and no one can help them, why should they not be allowed to avail themselves of the same facility that others in physical pain will be able to avail themselves of? Many will say, oh no, we won't do that in Jersey. We're only going to go this far. This is as far as we're going, no further. All I can say, sir, is in no country where this has been introduced has slippage not occurred, and in some cases, alarmingly. Let me give you a few examples which I hope, I have no guarantee of course, but I hope will further emphasize that this is far from an easy or simple road that we're being asked to embark on. Let me read you an extract from a doctor in Holland. In 2001, it's in his words, in 2001, the Netherlands was the first country in the world to legalize euthanasia, and along with it, assisted suicide. In 2007, I wrote, there doesn't have to be a slippery slope when it comes to euthanasia. A good euthanasia law, in combination with the euthanasia review procedure, provides the warrants for a stable and relatively low number of euthanasia cases. Most of my colleagues drew the same conclusion. But we were wrong, terribly wrong. He then stated at the World Medical Association that it was a mistake to introduce the law, and he said once the genie is out of the bottle, it is not likely to go back in again. We then, sir, will have the problem with dementia patients. And when it comes to show how difficult that problem is, I will outline one case that we had in Holland in 2016. a doctor accused of failing to verify consent before performing euthanasia on a dementia patient was cleared of any wrongdoing by a Dutch court. The 74-year-old patient had expressed a wish to be euthanized, but also indicated that she wanted to determine the right time. Judges said the doctor acted lawfully, as not carrying out the process would have undermined the patient's wish. Therefore, the suspect was acquitted of all charges. However, prosecutors had argued, sir, that the doctor, who has not been named and has since retired, acted with the best intentions, but broke Dutch euthanasia law by failing to ensure the consent of the woman who may have changed her mind. They argued that a more intensive discussion could have taken place before the decision to end her life. The doctor allegedly sedated the woman who was suffering from Alzheimer's. Then she asked her family to hold her down as she administered a lethal drug. She maintained that she had acted cautiously. The trial, sir, was considered an important test case, as people are living longer and are therefore more likely to develop conditions that affect their ability to think and remember. One of the most alarming areas of slippage, sir, is in Belgium, where in 2014 it became legal for terminally ill children to be euthanized with permission from their parents. The BBC headline read thus: Parliament in Belgium has passed a bill allowing euthanasia for terminally ill children without any age limit by 86 votes to 44 with 12 abstentions. Sir, bizarrely, if, and I pray this wouldn't come in, but if it did, we would have passed a law in the course of this parliamentary term where you couldn't smack children. And later on, and hopefully, as I say, it would never occur, but parents would have the right to decide to kill them. I hope and pray it never comes to that. But in answer to those, and there will be many now, I know, in the Assembly who say we will never have that here, let me refer you to the End of Life Choices group in Jersey, which asked the citizens' jury to consider, and I quote, age. In Jersey, the age of majority is 18, and that is what we propose here. In rare, sad cases, the law might enable parents to decide with and for their children in this matter. There you have it, sir. That first step, that first inkling that this is not as clear-cut as perhaps many think, and quite rightly think, that it may be. In closing, sir, would we rather have a choice of a doctor saying, sadly, we feel that you have only a limited time to live. We have been wrong, and obviously maybe again. What we will do is start you on this treatment, which will hopefully slow the process down. If it doesn't, we can greatly help manage the pain, and we have a wonderful hospice facility which can assist you and your family. Or, sir, would we rather have one that effectively says, I'm afraid there's no real easy way to say this, but I feel that your best choice may be for you to end your life. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy Southern.
Thank you, sir. And I will be mercifully brief, I hope. And I want to look at the situation from the other end of the telescope, rather than trying to justify, as I would, physician-assisted death, dying. Then I look from the other end of the telescope at what are the alternatives? What does staying with the status quo do? Well, one thing it would do is lessen some people's lives who were in serious pain, and within 6 months of dying. And it would lessen their time, because if they travel to a foreign country where legally assisted dying is in place, then they have to be fit enough to travel. Now, by months or whatever, maybe years. That's shortening people's lives. And I don't believe that should happen. It also opens the assistant, if UK citizen, prosecution for doing that assistance. And I don't think that's a position that we should continue to take. And as earlier speakers have said, it's a question of choice. When I examine the question of choice, I examine and look at the case of my own father, who was severely bipolar, went through massive highs and even more massive and dense lows all through his life. And it came to the end of his life. What alternatives were for him, he didn't see any, apart that is from suicide. And that's what he did. He had several goes first, but eventually a bottle of whiskey and tube to the exhaust of his car and carbon monoxide poisoning. He succumbed within hours. Would that he had some support to go in a less traumatic manner. But he saw no choice, and there was no choice for him. And that's where I am when I say I'm thoroughly convinced that the proposition before us today to bring about a position that assisted dying is the valid step to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Pinnell.
Thank you, sir. Opinions vary hugely on this subject, based on personal circumstances, experience, belief systems, age, and culture. Assisted dying is legal in many US states: Canada, the Netherlands, Colombia, Belgium, Luxembourg, Switzerland, Australia, Spain, and New Zealand, albeit under stringent conditions and with legal variations. People should not have to travel abroad to die and need to have their loved ones by their side. Everyone should have the right to choose the time and conditions of their death. Sir, this is a debate about the principle of assisted dying. If agreed, there will be time to examine in detail the required legal, medical, and other safeguards to protect individual patients and professionals responsible for their care, and importantly, safeguards against coercion of the patients. Essentially, the in-principle debate is largely about whether patients should have the choice to ask for assisted dying within the safeguards that will be presented and debated in detail if the principle is agreed. In general, however, it is likely that 4 witness statements will be required in Jersey, 2 each signed by 2 doctors, confirming that the patient is suffering from a grievous and irremediable condition, and that the patient has the capacity to make the decision to end their life. 2 other witness statements would also be signed by the patient, confirming that it is their considered wish to be assisted to die, and that the wish has been expressed over an extended period with relevant conditions set out by the patient. Whilst I completely appreciate there is no clear-cut yes or no determination to this very complicated and emotional issue, discussion and debate on the principle should not be delayed any longer. Safeguards would include that patients can only qualify for assisted dying by a series of criteria, which would include suffering a terminal illness that is likely to end their life within 6 months, or grappling with a grievous medical condition, irreversible decline, and unbearable pain and suffering. They must also be able to understand assisted dying and what will happen. We must remember this debate is about the principle. The detail will follow further debate and indeed is likely to be shaped by issues raised in this debate. In terms of end-of-life choices, 78% of the recent citizens' jury were in favour of having that choice. We can also and must champion the highest standards of palliative care, such as hospice care or hospital or home care, alongside assisted dying. It is not an either-or option. Death is an inevitable part of life. We all make choices throughout our lives, such as choosing our friends, our broader relationships, jobs and career choices, marriage and children, where we live and how we behave, amongst many others. Why then, when it comes to the intolerable and insufferable circumstances, should we not have the choice to end our own life without pain and with dignity? My beloved stepfather, who I'd known for some 55 years, died in July this year at age 99. He was a long-term supporter of dignity in dying. He died in hospital but was in a nursing home for a while. One of the many occasions I visited him was to help with his assessment by occupational therapists, nurses and care staff. I think they wished to determine whether he wanted to stay in the nursing home or go to his own home with a care package. When asked what he wanted, my stepfather, in a very strong and booming voice, said, "I want to die." There was nothing wrong with his mental capacity, but he was constantly in pain, very frail and largely immobile, with little dignity left to him. His medical conditions were irreversible and deteriorating. In his view, he had little or no quality of life and was simply living an existence. He subsequently had a very bad fall and died painfully. That could have been avoided. This is a debate about freedom of choice by the individual. In my view, assisted dying is a human right. I shall be supporting the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy. Senator Gorst.
Thank you, sir. I want to just explore the opening comments of Senator Mezek, and I think he was absolutely right to remind members and the listening public that this is a matter of conscience and should be considered as a matter of conscience. With any debate, of course, there are always two sides. And that's what we come to this legislature for. But I hope that all islanders recognise that this is a matter of conscience, and we may be divided. But I want to explore why that might be. So I'd like to thank all those islanders that have contacted me, I know many other members as well, with their own personal stories, moving stories, as we've heard from other members during the course of this debate, of family members who have suffered great agony at the end of their lives, who have perhaps wished that they could have died in a different way. We've also heard moving stories from families whose loved ones have had a second chance at life, and what joy that has brought to them, to their children, and to their grandchildren when they thought all hope was lost. And in those stories, sometimes those individuals continued life, no doubt with some level of pain, others without pain. This debate before us today causes some very profound questions about what it means to be in a society, what it means to be in a community together, what quality of life means. We live, sir, in a world of social media where we can see what someone across the world is doing. We see snapshots of each other's external lives. And we know that we are all prone to judging our own internal life by others' external lives. And that asks some profound questions about what is a quality life. In an assembly like ours, we of course rightly are seeking to improve the quality of life for all islanders. What does that mean? And sometimes, so there are no easy answers to these profound questions. Medicine and surgery have been seeking to improve and extend people's lives for generations. For generations. And we do what as we arrive at this debate, and others have had these debates before us, we're not the first. And we do have to ask ourselves profound questions about the influence of medicine upon the extension of our lives, and whether the constant improvement and extension of people's lives, whatever the cost, whatever the quality, whether that is the right approach or not. So each of us, I think, in questions like this, bring our own experience to bear, rightly or wrongly. But in doing so, it shows our humanity and our shared humanity in this community. I was brought up, camera keeps going, so I don't.
Yes, I think that's.
I shall.
I think you're
keep
back on
endeavouring
screen.
to switch it back on. I was brought up, so in a household where my mother looked after 3 of my grandparents. My teenage years were lived out in that multi-generational environment, which is common to many. That is how society ordered itself. And I can't sit here and say that my grandparents lived that life free of pain, because I don't think they did. Some would have had capacity, some of them would, and some wouldn't. And I can't answer the question of would they have wished to avail themselves of these proposals today. Because we are discussing something which none of us actually have experienced. We've had loved ones leave us, but we've not experienced it for ourselves. And the reason I raise that question, sir, is because, of course, I want to explore, I think, two important questions or elements that we are discussing today. And they are choice and suffering. I am a great believer in personal choice, but I am also reminded of the words that the Dean reminded us of. That personal choice, when legislated for, becomes a community choice. And there are sometimes that I sit here and consider the questions that we have to consider, and I think that I'm not well suited to being a legislator. Because we live in a world, so and I have to be careful not to denigrate your profession. We live in a world where legislators and governments like legislation. Lawyers make their living out of legislation. But there are many times that I look back and think and ask, has that particular piece of legislation done the thing that we wanted it to do? Has it helped the community deal with the particular problem that it was encountering? And if we are honest, I think we have to say that it hasn't. And I look at this issue that we are asking ourselves about today, and it is a prime area where it is, to me, a regret that we are having to consider that legislation is the answer, and perhaps the only answer, for islanders who are facing a painful death. Because each situation will be different, and the care that could be given will be different for each condition. The palliative care, the medical intervention, it will be different. And it isn't, I think, if we look, an area which sits well with a piece of black and white law. But we still have to face this decision today. The other question that we are needing to consider is one of unbearable suffering. Should we be seeking to alleviate for members of the community unbearable suffering? And the only answer I think that all of us can give to that question is yes, of course we should. Yes, of course we should. The question is, how should we be seeking to do that? We should be approaching these issues with compassion. That's not always easy for a legislature to do, but compassion is the right approach. But again, I make the point, compassion on an individual basis, support to alleviate unbearable suffering on an individual basis. And so, as other speakers have said, perhaps the crux of this matter turns upon the safeguards. I was very struck by my own deputy's speech about the contrast between individuals who are able to make a choice if we pass this legislation in due course. And I'm mindful, sir, that this is in principle. Individuals who are able to make that choice, and then the potential difficulties that vulnerable members of our community would face in the future. And I know that because it's an in principle debate, some members have felt that they will vote for the principle that is outlined in this proposal, and they will deal with the safeguards and the detail at a later stage. When I see the details and the safeguards outlined in the proposition as it stands, I have great difficulty in believing that those safeguards will actually deliver the protection to vulnerable islanders in the way that we would want to see. I could, sir, go and reiterate the statistics that other members have spoken about the increased suicides, the increased use of assisted dying in other places that have introduced it. But that has already been touched upon. Nonetheless, I think they are valid arguments and valid considerations. I must say, when I first saw the outcome of the citizens' jury, sir, one thing that struck me was that they proposed that such assisted dying should only be available to those who were suffering physical pain and didn't, or left to one side, those who find themselves in unbearable suffering with mental pain. And that in itself, sir, is a real challenge for me. Right now, 2 family members are suffering from dementia. Actually, only one of them would be able to avail themselves of this legislation were it to be passed, because only one of them remains to have capacity. But I also know from first-hand experience in my own family the unbearable mental anguish that sometimes goes on for years with mental health issues. And yet here we are as a community, on the one hand trying to say that we take those issues seriously, and yet we are separating again out those issues in a way that struck me as unfair. Because life and death issues are individual issues. They're issues for the individual, they're issues for the family. Of course, I do come from a tradition that values and holds the sanctity of life above of human life above all other values. And so, like the Constable of St. Martin, I have considered these issues carefully. Of course, I'm mindful, sir, that at the senatorial hustings 3.5 years ago, I think there was only myself and Senator Ferguson who, when asked the question, said that no, as we stood, we were not in favour of assisted dying. But having considered all of these issues, and having considered what the citizens panel and the citizens jury recommend, I understand why members today look as though they're going to approve this in principle decision. But for me, sir, I cannot accept that the safeguards that are proposed will protect the most vulnerable members of our community. I can accept that it will help give those who want to potentially a better ending to their life, although there is, of course, the evidence that suggests even some who avail themselves of as the assisted dying process still don't necessarily have a good end to life. So you know that my wife worked many years at the hospice, and that we all die differently in those final throes. Those Dean no doubt would refer to it as the number of people that he has sat at the bedside of. And so, sir, I will not be today voting for this in principle decision. As I say, I recognise from the majority of speakers that it will be approved. But I hope that it is, that if it is, I should say, if it is, we can continue to have a conversation across our community which recognises that it's a matter of conscience, that recognises that some in our community feel profoundly concerned about what the implications might be for them, about whether they are later in life a waste of space and should therefore, because they don't want to be a burden, choose this option. And that as we think about the safeguards, and that as we consider the safeguards, we give each other permission to ask again, even after an in principle decision, whether it will remain right for Jersey, having looked at the details of those safeguards, that it's not an open and shut case of having made an in principle decision, that we are then on a trajectory or on a particular route. But so again, I say that for me today, I cannot, for the reasons I've sought to articulate, but I recognise it's emotional, so I may not have articulated them terribly well. Others have. I cannot support this in principle proposal. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator. The Deputy of St John.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. So, I can find my place. Yes, I'm not going to rehearse many of the arguments that have been expounded today. I think the subject has been very well discussed and debated. I'm sure the decision is coming soon, but what I will speak to is my experience. And for 42 years, in one guise or another, I was a practicing registered nurse. During those years, I had experience of people who wanted, because of emotional trauma, to end their own life, and also people who had developed incurable physical disease, labouring on to death and experiencing unacceptable suffering in the process. My part as a professional in the intention of people wanting to end their own life was as an interventionist. There could never be any realistic conversation with individuals about their motivation for ending their life. We automatically assumed that a desire to end one's life was a wrong thought, and that all efforts should be made to prevent the eventuality. It is, of course, difficult to collude with persons who are being reactive to immediate emotional trauma, or the short-term prospect of intense physical suffering. But it's less of a problem to understand and to collude with if the reason to end one's life is based upon intractable, long-term physical or emotional distress, and the individual has a clear grasp of the future available to them. I begin with my first traumatic experience of death, a particularly harrowing experience for me, as I knew the person very well and knew that I did not have the weapons in my armoury to ameliorate his suffering. An old schoolmate was admitted to the medical ward I was working on as a student. He had a condition known as non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a condition very treatable today, but not so treatable then. He died following a protracted and painful period and required heavy sedation toward the end, a process that necessarily hastened his demise. He was 21 years of age, as was I. Over the years, it's been my privilege to be at the bedside of many individuals who've taken their last breath, many of whom have been in pain and would have died in pain had they not received large amounts of opiate pain suppressant, and in many instances that pain suppressant didn't work. Example of the medication I'm referring to is morphine, diamorphine, fentanyl, etc. These opiate medications eventually render the individual cognitively incapable and unable to relate to the world of thinking for oneself. As a consequence, the individual is unable to take decisions concerning daily life, let alone any conscious participation in the process of dying. What I'm coming to here is the process that is currently the approach to terminal care, that makes the individual a dependent being, and any notion that the person is effectively involved in the process simply pays lip service, as at no point can the recipient take control. The remedies are always done to the sufferer, and any determination of elongation or foreshortening of suffering is entirely in the hands of another. It's always good to be able to relate to one's own experience, and I'll do so here. Having spotted in my blood in my urine in December 2017, I concluded that such an event was serious and required a medical opinion. After presenting at the emergency department, after all, this was in my understanding an emergency, I was seen by the urology registrar on call, sent for an ultrasound of my bladder, and a suspicious mass was identified. The next few weeks and months were a roller coaster of events. Firstly, I'd become an electoral candidate, and there was an election campaign to get through, followed by a resection of tumour plus 4 sessions of chemotherapy prior to recess, when I escaped to Cambridge, and 4 weeks of daily radiotherapy. In this instance, to date, the treatment has been successful, and frequent invasive checks and scans have borne this out. So what might have happened, and may still if the cancer returns? All the best efforts of the oncologist, genitourinary surgeon and radiologist come to naught as the cancer becomes a law unto itself and defies the best efforts of medical intervention, becoming a reinvigorated threat to my body, spreading to other organs, bowels, lungs, liver, etc. The prospect of life is now greatly diminished, and the prospect of a painful and heavily sedated death is now very real. What would I see as a viable way forward? Rather than wait for an opioid-induced coma, I would choose to take my ending into my own hands. But I would need assistance from a learned medical practitioner who knows about and can administer the medication dose required to bring my suffering to a final conclusion. At present, there is no such course available. Physical illness has been at the forefront of this speech, but I go back to the emotional trauma that is characterised by mental ill health. It behoves our society to inquire in some depth about the motivations of people who wish to take their own life because of psychological stress. And we should understand that in some situations, after in-depth and exhaustive efforts to establish that motivation is sincere, a wish to end life is the individual's right. Notwithstanding that, a number of people will bypass any professional scrutiny. I wish to address some of the concerns that those opposed to this proposition are expressing. My understanding is that a vote today is only about the principle, and any subsequent law will be a long time in coming. The law drafting will take into account the many divergent views and concerns expressed in the submissions posted in relation to this proposition, and will also benefit from the experience of other jurisdictions cited in the many papers for and against this proposition. This proposition, as some would like to portray it, is not the end game. It is the very beginning as far as legislation is concerned. There will be ample time to take into account the many experiences in other jurisdictions, Holland, Belgium, Switzerland, Canada, etc. What we have today is an enabling proposition, not the eventual law. The proposition seeks an agreement in principle, not a move to assisted dying tomorrow. My wholehearted support is behind the proposition, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy. The Constable St Lawrence.
Thank you, sir. Sir, as we know, 78% of 23 people, the citizens' jury, agreed that assisted dying should be permitted in Jersey, and therefore we are having this debate today. However, I have been contacted by far more than 23 people, contacted by letter, email, and in person, in the supermarket, at my parish hall, and even visited at home. The majority of those have expressed the view that they do not support the principle of assisted dying. Their reasons have been numerous and are rehearsed in the many emails, letters and documents that have been shared with us. Sir, expecting this to be an issue that would provoke much discussion and the sharing of personal stories one way and the other, I called a parish meeting last week to gauge the views of my parishioners. The meeting was held immediately after a parish assembly in order to encourage people to stay and share their views with me and their parish deputies. However, following the assembly, to our surprise, most parishioners left and there remained only 3. Only 3, sir, to share their thoughts with their elected representatives on what is clearly the most challenging decision that we must make on their behalf. But we were grateful, sir, to them for sharing their personal experiences with us, during which we learned that they did not support the principle of assisted dying. So I know, sir, that the majority of the 23 members of the citizens' jury were in favour of assisted dying. I know that those attending my meeting were not in favour and I know too that most of those who have contacted me from across the island are also not in favour of this in principle argument for assisted dying. Views expressed in this debate today are clearly strongly held. However, our decision today will determine, in principle, whether, as a society, we choose to normalise the taking of a life. Whether, as a society, we choose to normalise the taking of a life. In all conscience, sir, based on what I have heard and read, I do not believe that the majority of islanders support that view. I shall not, therefore, support the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conatar. Chief Minister.
Yes, sir. I'll just check the sound quality.
We can hear you. There's a slight echo at the moment, but
Okay, so, hopefully, right, hopefully that works. Right, so it's been I have to say I found this debate quite challenging. I'm sure a number of others do, and particularly after actually the speech from Deputy Poynton, which I absolutely commend him for. Like many members, or all members, I've received a whole range of submissions and emails from members of the public. Equally, I'd like to apologise to those I've not responded to. There has been a large volume. I have tried to respond to very individual emails that have come through to me separately. And so, as I said, so it's been an extraordinarily difficult, it's been an emotive subject and debate so far, but obviously, as has been referred to as well, it's been very respectful, and I'm in the position of continuing to listen to the rest of the debate. I am still persuadable to change my view, but at this stage, I'm leaning towards supporting the main proposition, which ultimately is a principle, but obviously it does represent a very clear direction. I'm going to try and spend not too many minutes explaining why, but also, as other members have said, a brief speech does not mean there hasn't been quite a lot of deliberation behind it. And I'm going to start at the point which isn't belittling the subject in any shape or form, but and I thought was actually put very, very eloquently by the Contact of St Saviour's at the beginning of the day, which is in not the same way, to a much lesser extent. I've also had exposure to animals, large and small, through my life, and she spoke exceptionally eloquently around the fact that we actually, for animals, we do ultimately make a decision to put them out of their misery, to put them to sleep, and that is a decision we take usually very carefully. But we're actually, under present legislation, we keep intelligent human beings in pain. And then we also have things like DNRs, do not resuscitate notices, or indeed living wills. And I know those are different areas, but they are touching the area we discussed today, and all of them are not without their flaws. It also seems to me, as I understand matters, that even in the House of Lords as we speak, a similar piece of legislation has gone through the committee, has gone through a second reading, and I will refer to that later, and is in essence, and is now in the committee stage. And even if you put that aside, within, let's call it the British family, we obviously already do allow members, islanders, to travel to places which already have assisted dying for those purposes. But as we have already expressed, the access to that for all of those who might want to avail them of that facility, for want of a better expression, is mixed and is almost and probably subject to their ability to access the relevant income. And it does remind me of issues in the past which have been, I think, equally as important and equally as emotive. And for example, I'm thinking of abortion, and certain for saying that one is that it is at some stage taking a life, and it is somebody else taking that decision to end a life. But equally, it is encouraging or allowing, recognising, sorry, that in certain countries where abortion has not been permitted, residents who wanted to avail themselves of an abortion have basically got in the car or got on the plane to go to a neighbouring jurisdiction to have that a procedure undertaken. And I don't think that's acceptable in the current age. So I think so in those terms, that is kind of an area where we are seeing this whole position evolving. And I think it's worth noting, and it's in certainly a set of slides I think was presented to members, that in a number of jurisdictions, not only have they passed laws to facilitate it, but in I think it's Canada, Spain, Austria, and Italy, as far as I can see, in varying times within the last probably 6 years or so, the relevant equivalents of the Supreme Court or the High Court, Constitutional Court, have all ruled that essentially a ban on assisted dying did violate citizens' rights. That's the one I'm quoting on Canada, but that does seem to be a theme across a number of countries, as well as those that have already implemented the law. I do also think there is a concern from a number of members of the public who I've spoken to, as well as what happens actually when the body fails, but essentially the mind remains fine, and essentially one's end up trapped, potentially in something involving a lot of pain as well. And equally, and as other members have alluded to, as we all do, I hope, speak to loved ones, particularly older ones. And I know the ones I've spoken to have actually given me a very clear message that they supported the principles that we are debating today. And that really got me to thinking, is it all very well imposing my view, but what about the person who is facing a terminal and painful illness? Do they not have the choice? And I thought about both when actually my father died and also my in-laws. And certainly in my father's case, and it was the morphine that ultimately ended his life. That was a decision that was made for him by the medical staff. It was the right decision, but as far as I'm aware, and it was obviously quite a number of years ago, he had no say in it. And in terms of other correspondence, and obviously they do come from a perspective. It was interesting, I received an email from Baroness Beecher, who's been involved in the, as one of the emails I've had in the last 10 days, has been involved in the debate, very heavily involved in the debate, or bringing the bill to the Lords. And I just want to read two quotes from her email to me. I don't know if it went to other members as well, when she described in her speech how the options available to dying people are grim. We can starve ourselves to death, a horrible way to die. We can refuse treatment with more uncertainty about how much suffering that will cause. We can take our own lives. Thousands of people try to do that every year in the UK, and 9/10 of them fail with the most appalling consequences. We can poison ourselves with stored up pills and alcohol alone to protect our loved ones. The law leads dying people who desperately want medical assistance to die to travel to another country long before they are ready to die. It did actually strike one chord, because I do recall, I think, well, reading, I believe, on a matter of a couple, I believe, who had stored up sleeping tablets and took them with a view to achieving an overdose. And I believe in one instance it was, if the right word, successful, and they succeeded and they died. In the other one, I believe liver damage ensued, which I understand is incredibly painful. Interesting enough, the email finishes in quoting Baroness Davidson, who's saying there is an even greater imbalance. Those who wish this, who desperately want it, are not imposing the sane outcome on those who do not. But those who are arguing against denying others even the choice. And it was interesting, I think we probably all had an email, I'm going to refer to, I'm obviously not going to name that individual, who is someone with a terminal illness, and who wrote to us saying that they wanted to counter some of the views expressed by people against assisted suicide. This is reference to the media. And essentially the 2 points I'm going to pick out, which they identified, some common errors are: 1, the belief it's always possible to manage pain with medication, and 2, the belief that the alternative to assisted dying is dying comfortably. And they cite a personal example when they were admitted to hospital in unbearable pain. For hours, doctors tried to get the pain down to a manageable level, and for 6 hours they wriggled and screamed in agony. And I think, again, that was a very personal remark made, which again struck home. We'll see, I think we all, the one concern I think everybody, I believe, has in common is about safeguards. And I think the point I would make, which I hope will be taken into the work that is done, is that the safeguards must ensure that well but vulnerable people do not feel so unwanted or a burden to society that they would take advantage of this, if that's again the wrong expression, I think, for all the wrong reasons, and that those safeguards need to be in place. But I think to start to conclude, sir, somebody I was speaking to very recently expressed the view that whilst they had a faith, they didn't want to impose, or they did not feel they could impose that view onto others. And what got me thinking as well is that we have all experienced pain in some form, whether it's emotional pain, for some obviously childbearing pain, physical injury, and mental pain. And what I cannot in particular envisage personally is that unrelenting pain that one cannot ease and that one cannot touch. And I think that really is what has brought me to the conclusion of supporting at present, of supporting the principles. And I think I'm going to sum up by another email that was sent to, I think, all members when attacked, which cited, I think it's the governor of Maine, when they brought their assisted dying effectively legislation into law. And the quote was, "It is not up to the government to decide who may die and who may live, when they shall die, or how long they shall live." I think ultimately, sir, that's not a bad place for me to conclude my speech. I think ultimately it is about giving that ability to those who may well be in a minority, although I do reference the fact that this did actually start with a petition of just under 1,900 people in 2019. But it is give those people the ability to face in a way with better dignity something that will come to all of us at some point at the end of our lives. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chief Minister. Deputy Martin.
Thank you, sir. And I will be very brief. This has been one of the most difficult debates, and I've been listening, and to all the emails that I got, and I tried to reply to all. I said I was reading as much as I can, and I was still trying to make up my mind, because on the principle, it is somebody's life, and why would I not think that they should have the capacity, should be confident enough to make the right choice? And as we speak, sir, we are 49 confident people. That's what we are, because that's the job we do. And not everybody's like that. And some people are influenced, who are quite, not even frail, but they're influenced by family, they're influenced by friends. And there's just this nagging concern. And I know it's in principle. The reading of the second part of 3 that says has an incurable physical condition resulting in an unbearable suffering that cannot be alleviated, worries me greatly. I think that could be interpreted so many different ways, and it's there. But, and I think we've had some excellent speeches, but the main thing in principle that concerns me today, sir, is I have to vote, if I do, in principle, and I then have to trust a completely new assembly to see this legislation and all the safeguards put in place, because it will be after the next election. People voting who know they're not going to stand again, that's absolutely fine. I don't know. I've got to know a lot of people in the assembly. I trust them and I trust their speeches. But am I confident enough to say, in principle, let's get this started, and then somebody else has got to make sure all those I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and all the safeguards we talk about are in place. And I'm not sure that I can. I'm not sure it would be right for me to do that. I know other people have made their decisions, and I think it will go through. I'm still on the cuff, sir, but at the moment, I think just for that simple reason that I can't guarantee that I'll be there to make those decisions and make sure everything is really watertight. And I don't even know then. I have looked around the world and it does seem to start off slowly, but the numbers increase. Is that just pure demand that's not been fulfilled at the moment, or is it other influences? So we do need to know a lot more. So I'll leave it there, sir. I haven't 100% made my mind up, but I think I can't probably vote for this today. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Young.
Thank you, sir. I've been really troubled about this debate, and I chose to speak at the end because I still struggle with it. I think I've drawn the conclusion that perhaps I'm not well suited to social policy decisions. That's not my natural area, but of course, as a States member, it is my duty that I won't escape it. I will honour it to make a decision on behalf of our community, and whether we open the door to a legal framework and a system and government apparatus which enables people to decide in certain circumstances when and whether to end their own lives, and enables others to help them. And I think where I'm struggling with there's clearly two very stark alternative points of view, and clearly the majority of speeches have taken the view of I can understand this 100% of the rights, or at least the choice of the individual. Perhaps it's not the rights, but the choice of the individual to determine their own lifespan in the event of certain circumstances. But there's also the implications on our wider society of that arrangement, of moving away from what, to me, I suppose at my age, has always been a traditional, historic position of if you like, the very precious, special nature of human life. Of course, when you look at those two principles, they are inextricably linked. Absolutely. So weighing up, it's not so much a weighing out the balance, it's to try and work in the interaction between them. And of course, I listened very carefully, and I've listened to all of very carefully and Deputy Renouf, Deputy St. Juan, I thought really helped us about this, about the wider effects on our society. as to our dean, and I really thank them, because I think that really helped me. But on the other hand, the many accounts from most members speaking so far, which have been about the experiences of loved ones and their personal experiences, have been hard to listen to, and I'm absolutely sure they're right, because we know that medical science has got a long way to go, and palliative care hasn't been, I don't think, hasn't been the priority of medical care, research, and anywhere near enough resources to that, I think. And the reality is that, exactly as members have described, and of course Deputy Poynton gave us a really moving medical view about that, and those are the realities. The reservations, of course, are all there. Constable One, I found his comments very helpful, but what it comes back to is I'm being asked to make a decision that I prefer not to have to make, but I'm going to have to do it. We're advised that the Citizens' Assembly represents the views of Irelanders, but of course in recent days, and a number of emails and I've received and communications, that has been challenged. So I don't know. And of course, I've had, like many other members, many emails from the public, lots of letters and telephone calls, and I want to apologise for members of the public that I've not been able to reply to them all. And it's simply, whilst I've all read them carefully, I found it really, really difficult to come down one side or another clearly. And I didn't think my role was to influence others. I want to listen here. But I obviously got the impression that the communications I got, the majority were against. And I do wonder if that might be an age profile in the correspondence. I don't know. So for me personally, well, I hope, to retain my faculties, my age, and looking ahead. But of course, none of us can know what lies ahead of us, except the certainty of our own death. And that is something which, I'll be frank, scares me, but it's the reality. But I can be certain about a couple of things, I think, so far, which I think are going to influence how I'm going to vote. I'm absolutely convinced that the proposal that we have, I believe that it will change the nature of the relationship between medical practitioners and patients. Sadly, I think that will weaken trust, because we do put, certainly in my generation, we have absolute faith in our medics. They can tell us anything and we believe it. But of course, recently that confidence is being weakened by what is, gaps in our health service, the pressures that are there. And to some extent, almost, it's a lottery, I'm afraid, and that represents the reality of scarce resources and the pressures on the service. So it is a significant thing that relationship is going to change. And of course, the other position is that there will be many influences on people making their own decisions to end their life. And it is a reality as well that those influences, not all of them, will be well intentioned. I'm afraid the reality of life, as other members have said, does not support that. And of course, safeguards. Yes, I wish I could convince myself that the safeguards were going to mend the problems. We can guard against those influences that are not well intentioned. But, what is the level of confidence that I can have about bringing in legal systems, courts, and, those kind of processes? And of course, we know that generally they're imperfect. And so I think where that all comes to, voting on my conscience, I'd like to have had a referendum, so at least we knew what the public overview over is, but we don't. We will have to make a decision on what we know. And so, sir, I think my conclusion is I think the changes being proposed are a step too far, and sir, I will not be able to support them. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Connétable Simperlard.
Thank you, sir. I'm grateful, sir, for all those who have been in touch to let me and others have their views on what is for most of us going to be a difficult decision. I'm grateful in addition to those who've arranged the various presentations from both sides of the argument. One might say that I'm perhaps more chronologically gifted than some in our assembly and have therefore had more experience as a result. Whilst I do have some personal experience, I can't honestly say what the states of mind of my late parents were at the time of their deaths, and particularly whether or not they would have elected to have to die earlier than they might. It wasn't something that they would have discussed. They, like parents of many others of my generation who had parents of that era, had a zest for life. They had experienced the deaths and horrors that took place during the Second World War, and this may well have coloured their outlook with regard to their own lives. I doubt, sir, they would have approved of this legislation. To balance this, I have a 96-year-old aunt who had a late husband with Parkinson's. He ended up in care. She visited daily and he eventually died. I do recall my father being convinced that she had, in his words, bumped him off. This caused him to distance himself from her, and I honestly believe he was frightened of what she might do next. Whilst I've no certainty of there being any truth to this, it highlights that there is the potential of fracturing family relationships, as all may not necessarily agree as a process of assisted dying, if and when this is the case. This, I must add, sir, took place in Belgium. The psychological effects cannot be overlooked, and death of close relatives is an emotional experience which sadly many of us eventually have to endure. I'm apprehensive, sir, of approvals in principle because I've experienced in this assembly the difficulty in changing the course of such an acceptance as is laid out in the proposition. Notwithstanding, so the respect I have for those participants of the Citizens' Assembly, I have to say I'm sceptical as to their utilisation in Jersey. We, sir, are elected by the public of the island and have mandates to represent islanders' views. I'm sure many other members, have asked numerous parishioners on a daily basis for their views since this proposition was lodged. Many, sir, are having very strong opinions against the concept. Others, sir, have strong opinions which are supportive, and I empathise with all their points of view. I had a call only last night from a friend who recounted the painful experience of the final days of his father-in-law's life and that he would have welcomed an option to die early. I'm not a medical professional, but have read the views and reports of the BMA and medical professionals in the island. A point was made from another former nurse that the difficulty is that nearly every situation or circumstance is individual and may well not fit what is being proposed anyway. Doctors, sir, are not unequivocally supportive of the proposition, and I do perceive that it's being driven by a very well-intentioned but small proportion of our society. However, I am prepared to be proven wrong. My belief is that whilst palliative care is far better than it was, there is always room for improvement and that we should be focusing on that. I would, for my part, sir, prefer to hear more from the public. This needs to be an election issue, and I think a clear steer after the June election would certainly be the way forward. I accept that Deputy Morrow's amendment goes in some way to achieve that, but for my part, I'm unable to support the principles at this stage. I do feel it's incumbent on me to listen to those members of the public who've expressed their views on both sides, and based on the weighting of these various representations, which have come from all sectors of our society, young and old, religiously driven or not, I just cannot support the proposition without clearly demonstrated public support, whatever my personal opinion may be. I conclude so with a précis of a letter to the Times last month from a palliative care consultant who says choice is often code for I want. And the discussion is then about the balance between individual wants and societal risks. I may want to drive at 100 miles an hour, but the societal risks have dictated that the likelihood of hurting someone else is too great. Therefore, society has introduced rules against it, in this case, with speed limits. Assisted suicide is the same. Individuals want it, but omit to consider the wider societal consequences. Were this proposition eventually to become law, every person with a life-limiting condition would be under pressure to consider killing themselves just when they were at their most vulnerable and scared. Inevitably, there would be many who would take this option because they saw themselves as a burden, had misplaced fears, felt a hindrance on loved ones, or worse, were pressurised to do so. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Connitar. Deputy Truscott.
Yes, and thank you, sir. It's been a very interesting and very thought-provoking debate so far, and I just want to thank all members for their contributions. And also want to thank everyone that has written to us, and there's been a lot of very heartfelt thoughts being put through the emails, and it's been most welcome, because this has been a very difficult and I must confess, swayed to and fro one way or the other. And from an individual that ordinarily knows which way, very early on in the debate, which way he's going to vote, I found myself swaying. I was reminded earlier, it was Deputy Ayer's speech, and he referenced a neurosurgeon. That particular neurosurgeon that he referenced was Mr. Henry Marsh, who featured on the BBC Hard Talk programme with Stephen Sackur. And it was about assisted dying. Now, unfortunately for Henry Marsh, he'd been diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer. He's PSA, for those that are in the know, is 130. He's one of 5% of men still alive with that type of PSA. Ordinarily, for a man of 65 to 70, it should be in the region of 6 to 6.5. And he's had a lifetime of treating individuals with prostate cancer, and he knows that the medium-term prospects for him aren't particularly great, in so much as that you end up with double incontinence and paralysed from the waist down. And invariably, you die a very painful, agonising death. He was very frank, and I found the whole thing, and I did. Anybody, you can go back to BBC iPlayer and play it back, and it's well worth the listen. It is a frank exchange, as you'd expect on Hard Talk. It's one of my favourite programmes, but it just kind of resonated with me, because the only thing that Mr. Marsh has been left with is putting together a suicide kit, because he doesn't want to face the reality at some point of what he knows is coming. And he's also got a doctor friend to assist him when the time comes. So I think from his perspective, this type of legislation, and obviously it is making progress through the Lords, you know, this type of legislation is well overdue. There was another case on the BBC mentioned, it made news, of some poor individual that had a stroke and was paralysed from the neck down. I don't know if anybody recalls that, but it was a very, very sad set of circumstances. And you can imagine And I think this is what all of this is about, is empathizing with these people of the living hell that that individual must have been going through. And I think at that time he too was calling for assisted dying and the legal route out of what was for him an unbearable state of being. I will be supporting this. I think plainly it's got to come back at some point, and it's all about the safeguards. Plainly, it's about the safeguards. And I agree with Constable Jackson. There is an election round the corner. Very conscious of that, and I think it should make it into the hustings as a very one of those absolute up there needs to be discussed, and it should be well illustrated as members go forward with their manifestos where they stand on this issue. I think that's important going forward, because the big decision is effectively not ours, it is for the future Assembly down the line. I want to thank Deputy Morrell for bringing his amendment. I think it just adds that extra surety. I just probably finished there, but I always finish my speech and wish I'd have said something. So just bear with me a second, sir. Yeah, so just to finish, for me, this is about compassion. It's about empathy. It's about putting oneself in another's shoes effectively, and wanting to be treated as I would want to be effectively treated in their position. And nobody wants anybody to suffer. I think palliative care that is supplied throughout the British Isles, particularly in Jersey, is second to none. I'm sure we've all had loved ones go through there, and I say that their work is just outstanding. It really is. So I will be voting compassionately for this afternoon. I am aware that safeguards are absolute paramount. I am aware of potential ramifications. These are all the considerations that must be given very obviously strongly by the next Assembly. But for me, sir, I will be voting for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Higgins.
Thank you, sir. Today's debate, I think, has fully explained the arguments for and against assisted dying. And as there's nothing new that I feel I can add to what has already been said, I simply want to say a few words for the record. First, like other members, I want to thank all those who've emailed and contacted me on this issue. In fact, I've had more emails on this topic than any other, including the proposals for the new hospital. I have answered as many as I could, and I wish to apologise to those who I did not get back to. I have read what you have said. I have taken your views into account. But this is a topic which divides opinion in the island, and whatever way we decide to go today will disappoint all those whose view we do not follow. But it is the duty of members to take decisions, not to abstain or base it on straw polls. In the end, I think it comes down to a matter of conscience and personal experience. My conscience prevents me from denying anyone the choice to end their life in the circumstances set out in the proposition. Although with a caveat, there should always be robust safeguards put in place to prevent coercion, whether subtle or otherwise. And if I'm in the states when the details come back to the Assembly in the future, the strength of those safeguards will guide my decision at that time. Like others, I've experienced a family member dying in terrible circumstances. I would not like to see others to have to go through the same as they did. I know they would have liked to have had a choice in how they died and when. But at the time, it was just not possible. So my conscience and experience has determined my decision. I shall be supporting this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Constable St Mary.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I too have received many emails both for and against assisted dying. And for many of us, this has become a very difficult subject. And face-to-face conversations have not proved to be of an opinion to make this decision any easier. People are always referring to human rights, then surely the individual right to die by an individual must be considered and respected. There have to be safeguards, as we all know. Should a person not be able to make such a decision due to a medical condition that prevents them from doing so, then a decision has to be taken by the medical profession if there is no possibility of recovery or improvement of an irreversible medical condition. Death is part of life. It is part of our destiny as soon as we are born. It is just a question of when and how. We would all want to live a long life and die in our sleep, and indeed some people do. However, for most of us, life comes with a cruel twist, and death can be a prolonged, painful existence without any enjoyment. If someone wishes to endure such an existence, then that should also be their choice. But quality of life is also important to someone who has enjoyed an active life and has no possibility of doing so again. We make decisions to ensure that our pets are dealt with sympathetically when the need arises. A very difficult decision, as many will know, but necessary in order to eliminate physical and mental suffering. That option should be available to human life by the individual in order for individual choice, and perhaps sanctioned on their behalf. I am in favour of the principle, but there remains a lot of work to get this right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Conitard. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. And as a member where it's really rare when I speak so late in the debate. This is the most emotive and complex subject that I have ever come before me becoming a deputy. I have had, as other members, received numerous well-informed, well-reasoned emails and letters from islanders on both sides of the argument, and I'm really grateful. An apology if I didn't respond to all of them. I tried my best. And I'm really grateful for the members. I found myself, even now, emotional through this day, and I was close to tears several times today, actually, during the speeches. And there were emotional speeches from both sides. Constable St. Martin, Constable St. Xavier from one side, the Dean and the Deputy of St. One's on the other side. They were very well reasoned, and I'm grateful speeches from Senator Mezek and Senator Ghost and other members. That touch on compassion, that touch on empathy, and from both sides. Not easy. And this is why I'm trying to withdraw and look maybe in factual more ways. And I think as my general rule that government assembly should not have an opinion or power over what happens in people's private life. And if it was the will of some islanders to be able to die in this way, I do not consider it to be my place to deny this. The ability of a person of a sound mind to decide what they want to do with their own body is one of their fundamental rights as a human being. I also believe that hospice and palliative care work is important and it should be enhanced and continue to be developed. I personally don't see as it's hospice, palliative care or assisted dying. For me, people asked for assisted dying as a separate additional end of life care choice. It's about giving choices. Palliative care access does not eliminate request for assisted dying, nor does the request for assisted dying indicate a failure of palliative care. Rather, assisted dying is one of many options that can safely be made available to the people at the end of their life. And back to the facts, I read through all letters, presentations, work, sources that were available to me. And in the countries that have introduced assisted dying, such as Canada, Zealand, Spain, I have not found the evidence of the reduced hospice provision. And as all members, most of the members said, it's about concern the safeguards that should be clear and protective. Switzerland has seen a decrease in do-it-yourself end-of-life attempts since it introduced assisted dying 35 years ago. It is a long-term study. Also, from the statistics that I have seen, I didn't find evidence that assisted dying has been normalized in any countries that have assisted dying. The practice has become a normal practice. It didn't become a normal practice. Again, back to Switzerland, with 35 years of experience, they still accounts for only around 1.8% of all deaths through the assisted dying. So my focus and concern around the safeguards, which should be very clear and protective. And personally, I'm reflecting after surgeries, conversations that I had with my constituencies. And I'm still not sure. I know that I would support assisted dying, self-administrated. I'm not sure about euthanasia. And as we know in Switzerland, it's not allowed, when in another jurisdiction it is allowed. And I think, and I'm scared, as the deputy answered, I'm scared. It is a decision that we are making, but we need to make this decision. And I, as Chief Minister said, I don't want to deny to others the choice. I'm grateful for Deputy Morel to bring in his amendment, because it's allowing us to reflect, to continue the conversation. And as Deputy Sir John, which are really echoing me, I'm using what echoed at me. He said it's a beginning of the journey. It's allowing the conversation. We are not voting for the assisted dying introduction tomorrow. So I would be voting for this today to continue this journey and the conversation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy. Senator Farnham.
Thank you very much. So, and I too would like to thank all of the islanders that have been engaging with their elected representatives on this really important issue. And this is an in principle debate. I won't speak for long, sir, but I think generally we find if we agree something in principle, it means it's going to happen in some way or another. And this is one of the problems we have time and time again, is can we support the principle without the detail? Like I said, so I'll come back to that just towards the end of my short contribution to the debate. And we know that a lot of the arguments we've heard and will hear on these debates are ideological, so and are guided by religion, spiritual beliefs, ethics, opinions based on personal experience, age, culture. I think it is also a generational issue, as are many key political issues now. So as new generations of islanders come forward, we see the change in our assembly, and of course the priorities change. And so those are all major contributory factors to our thinking, sir. In my case, I've sat by the bedside of both of my parents who died natural death peacefully, albeit prematurely, surrounded by their family and with the aid of fantastic palliative care and modern medicine. And we have no regrets about that. And I've been thinking about had the family been asked to or been confronted with a choice, or had my parents had a choice to manage their deaths in a different way, how would we have felt about it? How would we have would it have made the grieving process any different? Would we have felt pressure to support them? We didn't want them to die sooner. If we wanted them to stay with us for longer in the hope that there might be a recovery. So, and I remember before my mother died, shortly before, there was a fantastic recovery, and I thought that was it, she was better, and then of course it went the other way. Would there be guilt or remorse? And those things we have to think about very, very carefully. But of course, rapid and continuously advancing developments in medicine and technology have provided the ability to save more lives now than it has ever been possible to do. Medicine has placed at our disposal the means to cure, or to at the very least lessen the suffering of people afflicted with terrible illnesses and disease that were once fatal or most painful. At the same time, however, sir, medical advancements have given us the power to prolong and sustain the lives, or some might say, prolong the deaths of patients whose physical and mental capacity just can't be repaired or restored, whose degenerating or deteriorating conditions cannot be reversed, and of course whose pain cannot be eliminated. And before doing some research, I found it difficult to believe, with my own personal experiences and with the advancements in modern medicine, that there was pain that couldn't be cured or couldn't be managed. But it is quite clear that in some mercifully few circumstances there is. The case for assisted dying is a powerful one, appealing to our nature and capacity for compassion and the obligation to support individual choice and self-determination. But the case against assisted dying is also a powerful one, and we've heard some powerful speeches today, sir, for both sides of the argument, and it speaks to us of a fundamental and important respect for life. And also, sir, as some members have said, the risks of moving perhaps towards, as some may see it, a diminished respect for life. Because as I've said, sir, most of the arguments are ideological. And many members, as I started by saying, will struggle with supporting a principle without the detail. And I think this, whatever we decide today, sir, this is coming, because if we don't agree the principle today, I think the future generations of elected representatives will. And if we accept the principles, the debate on the detailed legislation, which will be more important than this one when it comes, will compel us to choose which values are most important to us as individuals and as a community, sir. And I came into the debate not pretty sure that I wasn't quite ready to support it. I think I might have changed, I'm not sure, and I don't think I'm going to know, sir, till the time comes to press the button. But what I do know, sir, is this will be an option for the human race in most countries around the world sooner rather than later. And maybe the sooner we move to discuss the detail and are compelled to make a final decision one way or other might be the best way forward, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Moore.
Thank you, sir. As many members have referenced, we have all received a very high number of communications from members of the public. And it is in fact really good to see so many people engaging with what is a political decision. And I think it shows the strength of our community and an engagement that I hope will continue and be enduring beyond this important debate. And of course, today is just one day, but this debate will return to a future assembly, and that will be, if adopted today, in legislation. And that's the point when, of course, the detail and the scrutiny will happen. But one thing that has really struck me, sir, about the communication that we've received from members of the public has been the number of older members of the community in particular who have been really concerned and uneasy about the notion of this in principle debate and the notion of assisted dying. I greatly regret that those people feel that way. And it's clear that a good deal more communication needs to be conducted with the community upon this topic, whatever the result of the vote is today. That being said, there have been great efforts by members of the community to hold conversations for the public to attend and engage with, and that also is a really, really positive thing. And I am very grateful to the organisers of those debates and can only say that I would like to see more of. So that being said, I too have struggled with the concept of this debate, and a lot has been said today, and I simply wanted to refer back to the words of my good friend, the late Alan Duchemin, who wrote to us all before he died earlier this year. Alan, as we all know, had a brain tumour, and in his letter he wrote, "The symptoms of late-stage brain cancer are not pleasant. Pain, sickness, becoming unable to gain any enjoyment from my life, losing my dignity. I do not want to endure that kind of death, nor do I want my husband and my family to be left with memories of me suffering. Palliative care is wonderful, and I'm grateful for it, but it can only do so much. I want to decide when the time is right for me to go to sleep comfortably, peacefully, in my own bed, with my loved ones around me. What makes anyone think they have the right to force me to die in a particular way? A way I don't want. I do not want to end my life, but it is ending. I merely want a choice over how it happens." And so, having sat with my own brother, who also died of a brain tumour, I struggled with Alan's wishes. And we discussed it on many occasions, but I thoroughly respected his wishes. And I think the Constable of St John, if I can remind members of his excellent speech, also made a very important point about the level of consciousness that a person endures or experiences at those very last moments, often under the control of very strong levels of drugs. And that is what Alan did not want to experience. And having seen somebody leave this world in a similar circumstance, I can completely understand that. So today we are talking about principles, and today it's about choice. I would like to respect the wishes of Alan and others who feel that way, but I also think in doing so we must offer reassurance to those who don't want to see that choice for themselves, no matter the circumstances that they may face physically in the future. And so I would encourage the for the life of this assembly, an ongoing conversation to ensure that the legislation that comes forward, if this is adopted today, will provide very strict safeguards and also a very, very clear framework of regulation that will give confidence to every single member of our community and also the medical profession who will be involved if they wish to, in offering this to their patients. So I think that is all I need to say, and I'm grateful to all members today for their very heartwarming speeches. It's been a good debate, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Deputy Lahegro.
Thank you, sir. I, like many today, have sat on the fence. I've gone round in circles, and I've lost quite a lot of sleep in recent days, wondering what I was going to do about this debate. There was, as like everyone else, I've lost very close family members where that has had an impact on us, and I think we will have all had that experience. The last 3 years as the Health and Social Security Chair, sir, we were presented fairly early on in our time in the Assembly with those that wanted us to look at assisted dying. And we had the presentations, and I have to be quite frank, sir, that I never really thought much about it when I first was approached by them. But as time has approached, and we've had more and more emails and from all sorts of people with all sorts of views and across the spectrum. Because of that, I decided to do a bit of random research myself. And so what I did, sir, was I stopped and spoke to people who I see on a regular basis. I go in shops, I go in regular, you know, the fishmongers, the butchers, etc., etc. And so I just randomly started to ask members of the public what they thought about it. Some of them were very, very strict on the point of view that they were religious, so they felt that they couldn't be supportive of it. Others hadn't actually thought about it, and others said that they thought that there needed to be really strong safeguards. And I think that is something that all of us today would agree. And I think when it, if it goes through and it comes back for debate in legislation, those strong safeguards need to be in place. But also I think Senator Moore made a good point, sir, whereby we need to make sure that the members of the public have a good idea of exactly what is actually happening so that we can alleviate any fears that they may have about what is coming. New Zealand actually had a referendum in relation to exactly this fact. Before their legislation was totally passed, they actually put together the legislation and then they asked the public by way of referendum. And that may be something that this Assembly in the future will consider. I would probably be supportive of that, sir, but obviously it probably won't be this Assembly and I may or may not be here in the future. But I think it is actually a good way that the public may feel that they've had their say. And as it happens, we would then, you know exactly what people do think. But principally, sir, I do think that people should have a choice. We all make very difficult choices in life, and I'm sure all of us at some stages have done that. Many people have said that they feel that the relationship with their GP will change. I, sir, have, unfortunately, my GP retired a few years ago, but I'd seen that same GP since the age of 17, sir. And he took me through a very late pregnancy. He took me through the death of my mother, etc., etc., and the hard times and the good times, sir. And to be quite frank, I don't think that this would have changed my relationship with him, because I felt that whatever my problems were, whatever the joys of life came or went, I was always able to go and have a very strong, very honest debate with that GP as to what my options were as to whatever I was considering at that time. So I think from my perspective, sir, I don't think that that will necessarily change, but obviously we will see. But I think it is valuable that people have options, and I too would really hope that the government moving forward will actually ensure that there is good palliative care and that people can be given anything that they, what they want and what is necessary for them to end their, come to the end of their life in the most, how can I say it, sir, the easiest possible way for that individual. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Deputy Pamplin.
Thank you, sir. And it's a pleasure to follow my chair of the Health and Social Service Security Panel, which I am Vice Chair. And before I get to my speech, I would just like to, with our scrutiny hat on, talk to our comments paper that we did provide to States members for this debate. The reason I do so is because we were approached as a panel by some members why we had not done a piece of scrutiny review on this actual proposition. But we felt it'd be useful to outline our position and the work that we have done, and that is what members will see and members of the public in our comments paper, which I won't fully read out, but just remind members of the public and obviously members that the decision to go down the road with this citizens' jury came in February 2020 when the Health Minister committed to establishing this citizens' jury to consider whether assisted dying should be permitted in Jersey. And as his scrutiny panel, we obviously have quizzed him multiple times in quarterly hearings. We were also met with the organisations putting together that process and members of the independent board. And that's why we were safe to say in our comments paper that it did not have any political influence, was impartial in its uniqueness as well for the island. And it has been mentioned in previous speeches about the numbers of people and the decisions made. And much like a jury process, so it's very difficult to go to members of the public, especially when to ask and debate and in the senses of a jury on a subject matter which is universal. And though saying that, the process of bringing people forward was very independent in its bringing together as people. And I think it was somebody who mentioned that actually one of those people during the process changed their mind and was against. So, so I just wanted to conclude that point of why the Health and Social Service Security Panel have not done a review, because we believe that this is an in-principle proposition today. The role of the scrutiny panel will not be best utilised at this stage until the policy legislative process begins, and that process will be, as others have mentioned, in the future. I now turn to my own individual speech in this debate. I will speak in detail. Many reasons for that. One is there are no guarantees in life. There is no guarantees of tomorrow. Every day is a gift, and we must treasure each day and live like it could be the last. I also, in a more serious moment of reflection, don't know if I will be here following the general election, which is fast approaching. So I wanted to bring forward as much a fact-based information and some of the voices who have struggled to be heard for this debate. Any debate on this subject matter is one where there are no simple answers. The debate in which we need to acknowledge that truth and moral decency lie on both sides of the argument. And crucially, in my opinion, it has never been so important, of all the debates the Assembly has had that context is vital in judging, as we are sworn to do so, what is right or what is wrong today. Well, I also believe that this is such an important time to have this debate for many reasons. And also the genuine interest for real everyday folk of all walks of life who live on this island. Is given that what the island and this world has just been through, sir, with the pandemic, but also highlighted, again, one of the biggest issues facing all of us in modern times, and that is separating fact from fiction and how opinion is used as a weapon. To quote, as I often have many times, the following quote: "You are entitled to your opinion, but you are not entitled to your own facts." I say this now at the beginning stages of my speech, because as I started by saying, much of the wider discussion on this particular issue must be explored, but can be mired in bad assumptions. Sadly, we live currently in a generation where misinformation can spread like wildfire. And much like wildfire, it just needs one spark to be out of control. Most telling on social media platforms and some 24-hour news media presented as an opinion with driven agendas. Nothing new, some would argue, as tabloid media for generations had at times previously been accused of this. But now on social media, dangerously unregulated, manipulated with algorithms on social media linked to your chosen bias of media. It is a reality that we all face, and one that must be challenged and spoken about. Back to this topic. When you step back and start at a neutral position and start to do your own research, you can see this more than ever, as it is so much more accessible and easily done on both sides of the argument. Sometimes done unintentionally, sometimes only done to win, no matter the costs. For example, on one side, the idea that opposition to assisted dying is driven primarily by religious, deliberate restriction of knowledge and truthful facts. On the other side, proclamations that those who support this issue are tantamount to murderers, not to be trusted, have zero value for life. These are not good places from which to have a hugely significant, yet highly sensitive public debate. But it is to this Assembly's great credit that this debate has not crossed many of those lines. At the heart of this subject, sir, is the critical argument about the sanctity of life. This is not just a religious or faith-based argument. We all, in our 49 each individual ways, know well the special meaning of the right to live in a democratic and free society that we represent and debate in this chamber to improve the shared outcome, if though through different ways and political beliefs, to improve the lives of all. That we show respect and dignity to each other, to members of the professionals we work alongside, and the members of the public who do engage with us with their views and wishes. Some of us, of course, view the sanctity of life in absolute terms. And while I, sir, don't belong to any known faith groups, I am a firm believer in having faith and that personal choice is to be respected. There is nothing to, and should not be made to, fear. Being transparent and having a very clear, honest reason for doing something, if that is your faith and basis for your chosen view, should be respected. But sometimes in the world of politics, we also know all too well that sometimes the real reason or thrust for doing something is not so forthcoming. And such a sensitive subject, we must be alive to that also. So when we think about the stress of intrinsic value of life, and the worry that expanding the legal capacity on this subject if approved, that somehow we are drawn into viewing humans' worth in a devalued way. However, if we have been so perfect as a human race, why has it taken humans, and thankfully so now, years of evolution to fight for disability discrimination rights, as one example, as a priority, while still in some certain areas of delivery, we are still asking and missing strategies on dementia and carers. The pandemic exposed by putting a mirror up to our society and the planet in a larger context, how far we have come, but we have still got a way to go until everyone is treated as an equal. But still today, people are suffering and sometimes in great pain. However, it is that capacity for subjective evaluation of another's suffering or choice that truly makes us human. That this is the choice of freedom, free from the lack of liberty, that this island knows painfully more than most what not having that is like. A second argument heard, sir, is one I have encountered in my life and times in the previous jobs and roles before me in this job that I have now, and also mentioned by other states members, the argument of slippery slope. In the world of mental health and personal self-improvement, this is now referred to as catastrophizing. It is one of the root causes of the feeding of irrational thoughts and anxiety. It has been a subliminal cultural issue for such a long time, and it is so clear the way the two dangerously feed each other. In the context of this, in a principled decision debate, combining the aspects of conceptual, presidential, and casual, the slippery slope argument, it uses gradated language. It obscures the fact that there is a clear conceptual distinction of what is being put forward today in this debate. And on the subject of mental health, and on the subject of suicide. Certain times we have heard that word today, and it is difficult for me not to acknowledge that this terminology is very complex. In fact, for those who have been through the painful experiences of losing a loved one to this, there are no simple answers and there's no simple reasons for why people do this. We have to be careful. We have a responsibility in how we talk about these things and how these things are reported. One observation I also want to highlight, which I've seen misquoted or used on both sides of the argument, is using some data from the state of Oregon. So as part of their process and safeguards, they produce a yearly report with the evidence that is gathered as part of that. There is a section called End of Life Concerns. The context is in relation to the person providing that information meeting the legal safeguards of having a terminal illness and being mentally competent of their decision when doing so. In 2020, 245 people met the safeguarding needs and made their personal choice under the Oregon Death with Dignity Act. Of the multiple choices to choose from their answers, the top three of their end-of-life concerns by some distance was as follows. 231 of the 245, 94%, stated less able to engage in activities making life enjoyable. Second, 228 of the 245, 93%, losing autonomy. And 176 of the 245, 72%, the loss of dignity. Those three most frequently in the top three of this report, in its 23 history, have remained consistently as the top three choices in this report. To bear also clear of those 245, 66% of those people had a terminal cancer diagnosis, patients with heart disease 11%, and those with neurological disease 8%. 81% of those patients were 65 or older. The total number of deaths in the state of Oregon for 2020 was in the region of 40,226, with only 245 taking their law, passing the safeguardings with the Death with Dignity Act in the state of Oregon. So as we know, it is not for everyone, but they have that right and they have that freedom of choice in that state, in that country. Again, numbers, context really matter on this subject. For comparison, when the fourth chosen end-of-life concerns in that survey, sir, for those with a terminal illness, as I've explained, 66% of which have been a form of cancer, they've cited as a possible burden on the family, friends, and caregivers. Of the 245 people in 2020, it was 130, which is 53%. But it must be kept in context again, the facts of their personal individual terminal illness when submitting that information, and not because of their age or any disability. I see what they are saying as a compassionate admission for their loved ones, honest and brave. So I believe our role and duty in this matter, which is the responsibility we have shown by engaging this debate today, is the maturity of this island's democracy. The proposals on all contentious issues should be worked out through public debate and by the public's elected representatives. Like, for example, this debate and assisted dying laws. For example, the argument will devalue the lives of old or those with disabilities or access needs. We must be clear, sir, that our island society should view vulnerable people to whom we have obligations as that, and not as inconveniences weighing us down. So I believe the real issue is less the laws than wider societal attitudes and priorities towards the vulnerable people, but should be even existing to all of us. We can understand why, of course, when so many do feel cut off from the rest of island society. The frankly unforgivable state I found our inpatient mental health facility when I visited in 2018, even before I had my oath of office. The growing number of young people let down in care, or the elderly struggling with rising costs, the cost of living, or those with disabilities and access needs still needing more reassurance and a carer strategy. It is just not right on any humane level that our fellow islanders with a disability would fear in any way. We are simply not that island, sir. And I firmly believe and have great faith that any laws passed in this assembly would not allow that, not on this island, not ever. And for those who are worried about processes, I have great faith in the staff and the professionals that serve this island, be it those in the civil service, be it those in law officers department, be it those on the front line, the nurses, the carers, the care providers, those in charities. And I will cite a recent mental health report that we are all aware about. This independent review noted that it met and spoke with many professional staff on the front line who had a real motivation to develop and improve the service and the care and have the potential to achieve positive change. It is crucial to remember so many of our wonderful services are supported on faith and charity. So is that right? This for me is a very big moral question for the island going forward, especially when we are talking about the Jersey care model. It must be successful. It must. It is also a wonderful uniqueness in the heart and the DNA of this island, much like our honorary police service. It has to be valued, but valued, supported and evolved with the times. The amazing Jersey Hospice Care, of course, with its high standard of palliative care at its premises, for those like myself who's gone through that service, caring for their loved ones as we said goodbye to them, is one that words just cannot justify what they do. But sir, they have limited rooms, and we would all love for them to be able to expand. Of course, others also provide that service via the hospital settings and family nursing and home care. But we must look at the provision of the care we offer as an island and provide what is sustainable, especially for the elderly, and do more to support the unsung heroes of this island, the carers of this island, young and old, mostly unpaid. During the COVID pandemic, in the United Kingdom, there were some abuses of the do not resuscitate orders, reported to have been given to those with learning difficulties without regard for their wishes or welfare. So these stories were shocking. And it is right that it was called out, because then you begin to understand and see the anxieties of those concerns of those we've been hearing and why it is our absolute duty to protect them. But I would stand here firmly today and ask how many of us would argue that the solution would lie in getting rid of DNR notices. For me, that same logic is the same for this debate too. There are many other questions, from the need for the improved palliative care to the relationship between individual choice and the common good, with which to wrestle in this debate. Too often, though, these get entangled in a common refusal to see the significance of the argument from the other side. Compassion and moral righteousness does not belong to the few. I will conclude by saying that when I was the business manager of the Jersey Brain Tumour Charity, I met, sir, some of the bravest and strongest islanders you will ever meet. Despite this cruel and despite sudden and tragic will that they've now taken hold of their families, so many times the work that that charity and many others do is centered around the support needed for the loved ones of those feeling helpless, watching their loved ones change in front of their eyes, in pain and sometimes, and slipping away from them in the cruelest of ways. Although I never met Alan, he sadly passed away on the 1st of May this year. And though fortunately it was a peaceful end, as Senator Moore stated, his final months was without choice. I would also like to quote his final words to us in his email. And I quote, "I do not want to end my life, but it is ending. I merely want a choice over how it happens. When you consider the outcome of the citizens' jury, you have a chance to do a thing for our community and to lead the way for the rest of the British Isles and the world on this end-of-life choice. I hope you will not waste it. Yours faithfully, Alan. So this tiny, imperfect island has stood as a beacon of hope and light in the darkest of times to many who need it, from more than 75 years ago and in different ways this past 18 months. Today, after showing much openness with a careful, truthful, compassionate and legislative-minded debate, we could go forward, protect the vulnerable, vow to improve all the lives in and out of this debate, in the memory of those not with us today and the future of those to come. As others have said, the work to get the legal and ethical safeguards will commence, including political scrutiny on both sides. And as others have also said, and I couldn't agree more with the chair of our panel, as New Zealand led the way, engaging with the public every step of the way, much more than we have ever done in the past. I call for the proposer of this to take everything as it is written, to give as much choice, to be less narrow-minded, so it can come back in the future for the work that it needs to be done. With dignity, for all. Today is that day. Empathy is a choice, one we're about to make, to give choice, in the name of those who are not here in person, but with us always. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. And I'd like to thank everyone who's spoken so far, and particularly all members of the public that have engaged with us, and members particularly of my parish, in my case, who have also engaged with me and others on this incredibly difficult subject. It's been well debated and well thought through so far in the main, certainly in terms of its tone. But I do feel that there has been a tendency to overlook reality whilst almost in a Panglossian manner, believing we live in the best of all possible worlds. And it's that I'm going to concentrate on. I'm going to have to speak through my reasoning on this, sir. Because quite simply, the first I really engaged with the issue of assisted dying was in fact the last election. It was an election issue at the last election. And we were all, as election candidates, asked by various people our thoughts on assisted dying. My thoughts were quite simple. In principle, I'm in favour of assisted dying, so in theory, I should be pressing for. But my principle is based on the fact that I believe in people's liberty. I have a tendency to believe in liberty and the desire for choice, and that if, you know, live and let others live. I'm not someone who wishes to get in the way of people's choices when they're not harming others, when those choices can be made in a proper context. But I knew what I believed then, which is if we are to bring in an assisted dying system or regime or service in Jersey, we need to have a very clear, very sober, island-wide conversation and debate about it, not just a debate in the States. It's a, in my view, and I said back in 2018, this is not something to be led through the media. This is not something for any party to grab and raise as a burning issue. It is not something to be populist about. It is something that we need to think very carefully about. And this is all whilst believing that actually, personally, I'd quite like that choice in certain circumstances. And I don't particularly wish to deny it to others. But this isn't about me. This is about the island of Jersey and the people who live within it. It's about our society. And actually the debate today has very much focused on the individual and a lot less on society. We heard the previous speaker who spoke excellently well, but in my view, didn't really speak about some of the reality involved in assisted dying. And it's that I really want to focus on. There has been, as I've listened all day, there's been very little discussion of the process of assisted dying. And by that, I don't mean the safeguards. There's been mentions of safeguards. I mean the actual process, the actual, how does a person who partakes in assisted dying die? That's hardly been mentioned today at all. We, I believe, as a chamber have, and people in general, me myself, when I think about assisted dying, if I was doing it for myself in an awful situation where I have a horrible disease and it's causing me pain, I think we tend to think of it as being easy. You take some pills, you have an injection, whatever it may be, and away you slip. In fact, somebody did talk about earlier about, going to sleep and slipping away. But this isn't the case. Practice of assisted dying appears to be different. In fact, British Medical Journal from earlier this year, there's an interesting letter from a pharmacist in there who says that many promoters of assisted suicide often suggest that the use of medications during the assisted dying process results in a pain-free, dignified death for all. This is not the case. Modern medicine cannot guarantee a pain-free death. The difficulties and complications, this is still continuing the quote, the difficulties and complications of medication administration during the assisted dying process are rarely mentioned by those promoting the introduction of assisted suicide or euthanasia to intentionally end a human life. Many deaths during assisted suicide are prolonged. Patients may become unconscious relatively quickly, but the dying process can take up to 30 hours or more. There are also reports of people re-emerging from a coma and sitting up during the dying process. This causes anguish to them and their loved ones. Quote continues, a number of medicines used in assisted suicide and or euthanasia were previously used in executions. Use of medicines during executions has been described as inhumane, with reports of people feeling burning sensations throughout their bodies prior to death. And it has struck me that during today's debate, there has been very little discussion of that element of it. And certainly, because as I've looked, taken account and a tally, it does seem like this proposition is going to pass quite overwhelmingly today. And so when it comes to that second stage, I do apologise, I did mean to thank the Minister for accepting my amendment, which was there because of the way I felt back in 2018 about the need for a long, sober, prolonged discussion about this. It strikes me that when we come to that stage, we have to look at this closely. What is the reality? Because death does not come easy. And I fear we believe today that it does. And another issue, that there's been talk about slippery slopes, and again, Deputy Pampton talked about that and the fact that it's a form of catastrophizing. And I understand that position and often would agree. But, and it's been raised with me, the slippery slope idea. That has happened in some countries, so let's not pretend that it can't happen here. It can. It has happened. I do find it incredibly difficult to understand how Belgium and Netherlands, it may be one or the other or both, have extended assisted dying to children. I find that incredibly difficult to understand. But the area I would particularly like to focus on here is the issue of mental health. The proposition before us quite clearly states that we are talking about physical suffering. I just briefly turn to it. So if we pass this today, the person must have been diagnosed with a terminal illness, or is reasonably expected to die within 6 months, or has an incurable physical condition resulting in unbearable suffering that cannot be alleviated. Why has there been the definition of physical? Quite simply because it is excluding mental and mental health. So here we are saying that physical suffering, you can alleviate that through assisted dying. Mental suffering, we're saying, no, you've got to put up with that. And so I could quite simply understand how, when it comes to mental health, if we pass this, in the sense of if it goes through all the stages and becomes legislation and becomes a system and a service which is offered and available in Jersey, it won't be long before mental health is brought into that. And I can understand that. I have friends with mental health issues. I have people I know in my life who I believe have an illness which one day will lead directly to their death. People who suffer certain mental health problems, they are effectively suffering a terminal disease. And yet we're going to be denying them this. And so I don't know if slippery slope is quite the right phrase, but I would say it's going to be very difficult after passing this to deny the extension to people suffering from mental health issues. Because who are you or who am I to say that physical pain is more difficult to live with than mental pain or emotional pain? So it is very difficult. I'm trying to get to grips with that. Because I don't know if I have the right to say that everyone, whether it's mental health or physical health, should be able to access assisted dying, or whether we should just say actually no. I think there's another issue which is not been discussed so much. It has been brought up once or twice, and that's the issue of uncertainty in life. And I have a very close to home example of this, and that is a member of my wife's family who a number of years ago, 5 years ago, was given about 3 months to live, suffering from an awful cancer. And it was over the Christmas period. And so on New Year, we traveled, we organized, the family organized and traveled to the UK to celebrate New Year. And one of the strangest New Year celebrations I've ever encountered, because you're trying to celebrate New Year whilst also knowing that you were saying goodbye to somebody. And this person had been given a prognosis of not seeing the end of February. And so it was very odd situation. And we all firmly believed it. The doctors had told her that she wouldn't live past February. In the time between New Year and February, which isn't a very long time, she discovered a trial program for a medication that was being put through tests that was only being offered in the area of the country that she lived in. That was a very small trial, but she was offered a place on it. So she took it. And the wonderful news is that she's here today, 5 years later. And she has an excellent quality of life. It's not a case that she's living a demeaned quality of life. She has an excellent quality of life. A life that she wasn't, by the doctors, told she would be able to lead. So this isn't somebody who's been given 6 months to live and ekes that out or lives a year longer than expected. This is someone who was given no more than 3 months to live, and 5 years later no longer has cancer and is enjoying life with her family around her. And I do find that very difficult, because when we are talking about somebody has been given a certain amount of time to live, therefore they may choose to end their life. How long should that period of time be? As I've discovered through my own family's experience, 3 months might be too long. Maybe we need to say it should be 2 weeks, something like this, because life is uncertain and we don't know what's around the corner. I've also, if I can go back, and I apologize for the meandering in the speech here, but I talked about mental health and how that is, for some, their mental health problems are effectively a terminal illness. And that also brings up, I think, the matter that has been raised of the increasing suicide rates that apparently accompany, and I take other people's research for this, apparently accompany assisted suicide regimes, for want of a better word, assisted dying regimes. If I could quote, there's a consultant psychiatrist, works in Jersey, referred to the VERPA, or the Werther effect, phenomenon whereby background suicide rates rise when there is heightened publicity on the matter, and noted that suicide rates had increased by 1/3 in the Netherlands since assisted suicide had been legalized. In Jersey, we are really working hard to bring down our suicide rates. Do we really want to introduce measures that will make them rise? Now, I don't know if it will make them rise, but it is something. When I talk about this idea, we've been talking about individual choices, and I firmly want my individual choice to be able to turn my life on or off. But as I've said, actually there's a reality. There is no way of turning your life off, no easy way. But on top of that, if my desire for my choice means that actually the social effect is to increase suicide rates within our society, then what is the cost of my personal choice? I'm finding that one really hard to come to terms with. It was something that I hadn't considered until I first read about this recently, but it's something that's hit me hard. Because if decisions of this assembly actually result in increasing suicide rates outside of the assisted dying regime, then I find that really problematic. I'm struggling with that. And then my final part, which is really, I want to talk about Jersey. And first of all, I'll go to the in principle issue. In principle, I'm in favour of this, but in principle, I'm finding it hard to vote for this. And part of that comes down from the situation we find ourselves in Jersey today. So number one, in terms of the British Isles, we would be pretty much, I believe, the first in the British Isles to be doing this. I'm not sure this is an area we should be leading. But outside of that, I question our ability to deliver the regime, the systems, the regulations and the safeguards that are necessary. And when this passes, because it looks like it will, there is no question I will support, and I will be led by the Assembly on this. There is no question that I will in any way try to stop the Assembly's wishes going ahead. But I will be over those, if I'm still in this State Assembly, I'll be looking through those regulations and those processes with a fine-tooth comb. Because we have an issue in Jersey in where we are seeing processes within the health system being failing due to individual actions, collective corporate actions, time and again. We saw recently the mental health review, which Deputy Pamplin quoted from. And one islander speaking about that recently published mental health review said, the crux of the issue here is the significant professional improvements needed from our consultants to deliver treatment and care in line with guidelines and evidence-based practice. Unfortunately, professional processes and practice are not delivered to a consistently acceptable standard by our senior clinicians. This places our islanders at risk. Now that was about mental health, but you can talk about that in many other areas of the health service. We speak to people, I speak to people, whether their problem has come at the primary care or secondary care level, where processes and individual professional decisions have failed them. This is not an area we can fail islanders. And so I really do worry about our health. It's not just, when I say health system, I mean the entire system, not just the government elements of it, all of it. I question whether we can do this properly. I question whether at the moment, maybe in 10 years after lots of investment, maybe we can. But at the moment, can we? After years of the lack of investment? I'm not so sure. In a similar way, a very recent article, news item, really disturbed me and spoke to me strongly on this. And that was the issue that was raised recently in the coroner's court, where, and I'm going to speak about the news item, an elderly woman, and I'm quoting from the news article here, an elderly woman whose death was caused by the effects of sedatives and opiates was wrongly given end-of-life care after the pain she felt was attributed to cancer instead of a rib fracture, an inquest has concluded. I mean, that terrified me. A lady had a rib fracture that was diagnosed as cancer, and so they chose to go down end-of-life care. That's happening now. That's where we are today. How are we going to deliver an assisted dying regime when that's where we are today? That really worries me. What really worries me even more when we're talking about assisted dying is that same article then goes on to say the case very nearly did not come to inquest at all, because the lady's initial cause of death certificate gave no indication that she had died from any condition other than natural causes. We would never have found this out if somebody somewhere had finally realised what had gone on, but the processors failed this lady and her family, from the individual doctors failing to diagnose correctly to the processors in the health service, which then failed to pick that up until the very end, which was her life had gone, but the inquest, which nearly didn't happen. So certainly, if this goes ahead, I will be making sure that anything with regard to the processes and procedures, when that comes back to us, I'll be working as hard as I possibly can to make sure that every single assisted dying case goes to the coroner, because we will need, that will be the only way we can make sure that there is not abuse or failure of process in the assisted dying system if that comes through. That's something I resolved today, because we will need to make sure, because that cannot happen, that people are being diagnosed incorrectly, giving end-of-life care for something which wasn't end-of-life, and then not going to inquest. That cannot happen if this is to succeed. And so I look at all this, I look at the picture of Jersey's health system at the moment, which is undergoing enormous change. And I question whether we can deliver this. And that's the reason why, despite the fact that in principle I am in favour of this, I don't feel I can vote for it. Maybe in 10 years after investment, etc., after new hospitals in place, after the whole system with the Jersey care model, the hospital, after all of this has settled down, after we've got the primary care in the right place, working properly within that integrated care model, maybe then I'll feel Jersey's in a place to deliver an assisted dying system safely. But all the evidence, and the previous speaker, Deputy Pampton, did say we need to look at the context. And the context here is that Jersey's health system is not capable of delivering this in a safe manner, which protects islanders. And I will briefly touch on coercion, because that is one of the biggest issues I have. One of the saddest things that has happened in my life as an adult, because it's a realization, again, of the reality of the context, is the incredible sadness as I learned how families can turn against each other, particularly when somebody has passed away and there is financial gain, inheritance there. It's one of the saddest things. And I really worry that when someone who has a sizable estate is there, that there will be coercion. And it's going to be, I cannot envisage how, today I do not understand how any doctor, any professional can be sure that there was no coercion involved. Because coercion is so subtle. Coercion is what leads to the worst crimes in our society today. They start through coercion. And the trouble is, of course, in this situation, the person being coerced will not be around to let us know that it happened. So I'm finding that really difficult to deal with as well. And so I find myself in a very strange position that my principles tell me I should vote for this. But my understanding of the place Jersey is in, my understanding of the realities of where this island is, are telling me that actually this is not a safe thing for us to do now, because we can't even get our existing processes right. We cannot even today make sure that a rib fracture is not diagnosed as cancer. And in that context, I don't know how I can bring myself to vote for this. But as it will go through, I will make sure that, as I said, I will have such an eye on those processes and procedures. So I see you lean forward, and that may be a suggestion of the time.
No, not at all, not at all. Yeah,
it may well be time to bring this to a close, sir. But thank you, and I thank everyone who's taken part in the debate. It's not easy. It has made all of us search deep inside. And some of us, in my case, have come up with surprising conclusions. Thank you.
The time is now well past that we would normally adjourn. However, Deputy Pamplin wishes to propose that we continue into the evening, whether it's for a specific period or till the conclusion of the debate. I'm not able to say. I have one person listed still to speak. It may be helpful to inform that discussion. If anyone who has not yet spoken but wishes to speak, I won't write it down because you don't have to speak in this order, but if you could indicate in the chat that you still intend to speak in the debate so we know how many speeches there may be. There's no need for people to say they agree with Deputy Pamplin. He will have to put a proposition, it'll have to be voted on. I would ask members just to say if they are intending to speak so that an informed decision can be taken as to whether we continue or not. Well, I'm assuming that well, no one has indicated that they intend to speak, so we can therefore put the matter. Do you propose, Deputy Pamplin, that we continue into the evening, and if so, for a specific period, or for how long?
Yes, for the benefit of the public, I have recommended that based on, and as you've just outlined, we conclude based on people left to speak, and I've put a limit of 6 o'clock. If it seems there's only one more person and they're concluding, we'd be able to reach a consensus tonight. Obviously, I'm in the hand of the Assembly, taking in mind the welfare of everybody who works in the building as well. But I do propose that. Thank you, sir.
That's seconded.
Yes, sir. I said we're going against principle. We adopted a principle that we should be an equal employer, and we're not. We're refusing the rights of some of our membership.
Well, I mean that's a reason to vote against if that's your view. It's not a reason that the proposition can't be put. To remind members, there is no one who has indicated a wish to speak other than one person. And then obviously the rapporteur will have the opportunity to respond back. Does anyone wish to speak on the proposition that we continue until 6 o'clock? Well, if no one else wishes to, yes, Deputy Alves.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to echo the words of Deputy Southern. This is very late in the day to be deciding to extend the sitting. People will already have other commitments, and as the Constable Ballard's mentioned in the chat, we do still have other business to deal with tomorrow. In addition, people may change their mind overnight as to whether they'd like to speak on this subject or not, which would give them more time to prepare for that. And Deputy Guida has also mentioned there that they also have an Ask the Minister event tonight. So I'd like to ask members to take that into consideration when they vote whether to extend this sitting tonight. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Young.
So I think that members, this is a huge debate. It's got very significant, will have very significant effects. I think members should be given the opportunity to reflect overnight. Those members that have not spoken, whether they wish to speak, and others, I do think it's important. And also, I do agree that at the last minute, just to suddenly try and deal with this in what is now 17 minutes. No, I don't think so. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? I've noticed people are making observations in the chat. Really, if you wish to say something, it might be useful just to speak, but does any other member wish to speak? No other member wishes to speak? And I close the debate and ask Deputy Pamplin to respond.
Thank you, sir. And obviously, I welcome all contributions. I'll keep this brief because of the complete contradiction otherwise. But the point has been made. The agenda is not finished with public business, and we could be even debating what we do at the weekend at this rate, given the next debate is going to be equally very contentious. This is a very serious debate. I believe at the right time. We're in the state's hand, of course, so I maintain the proposition and ask for the bell.
If that is called for, I'd ask the greffier to place a vote into the link. The vote is on, do we continue until 6 o'clock? Another 16 minutes or so, 15 minutes or so. And I open the voting and ask members to vote. A vote pour is to continue. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I think the proposition is defeated. I'll have to do some mental arithmetic. It's poor is 20, contra 16 in the chat. I have 8 contra in the link and 2 poor in the link. But all of a sudden the list has appeared, so I now can't do the sums anymore. Is that correct? Let's see. This accords with my own calculation, which the proposition is defeated. 22 votes pour, 23 votes contre. Very well. Is the adjournment proposed?
Yes, sir.
The Assembly stands adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning.